about an hour or so, they are now marching to the Capitol. So they're headed to the Capitol right now. Now you see a lot of people that are still here, though. This is not by any means the majority of the group, but they have people that stayed back here because this is where that large police presence is right now. If you could just take a look at this, they actually just swapped out the bicycle cops with more of the militarist cops, and you see the two lines of police officers, and then the National Guard goes all the way back. So some of them stayed here, and they continue to have those debates and talk to police officers. There's still a lot of passion out here tonight, day 4 of these protests right now. And so that's what we're seeing right now. The majority of the group has split up and they've headed to the Capitol. And right now we have a lot of people back here who are staying back here, and they're continuing those conversations with police officers. Still people walking around with signs. And earlier today, I do want to say, today, there was a moment where the protesters came up to police officers. They wanted them to kneel with them. They asked the police officers, kneel with us. So those officers did start to kneel, and this received a lot of applause from a lot of people in the crowd. But there were still a lot of people who were angry about that, about them kneeling. They didn't appreciate that everyone was kneeling together. So you can see that there's still those conversations and those debates going on between groups right now. I just want to say I've been out here since 4 o'clock. It's almost 8 o'clock now. It's about 7:30. And everything has been extremely peaceful. There's been several times when police officers have gone into the crowd of protesters to talk to them, and protesters have gone up to police officers to talk to them. So we've seen that now for almost 4 hours at this point. So again, just to reiterate, majority of the group has headed to the Capitol. There are some people who are still hanging out back here because that large police presence here. It's about an hour and 30 minutes until curfew. So we will see, we will stay out here, of course, and keep you updated on what's going to happen as that curfew approaches.
Hope, tell us how the crowd has changed from 4 to 7:30. As we were in the 5 o'clock newscast, it seemed like it was the crowd was much thinner. I don't know if people have gotten off of work and come down, but it seems like as we've gone into the more evening hours that this crowd has really intensified, albeit still peaceful.
Oh yeah, it probably when we got here at 4 o'clock, there was probably 200 people here. And then as the hours kind of progressed, I would say the majority of the crowd kind of came in at around probably 6 o'clock is when that crowd kind of grew from 200 people to all the people you saw out here earlier. And there have been other little pockets of groups that have joined in with this protest right now. So that's kind of how the crowd has grown just from 4 to 8 o'clock. It's grown substantially. And now that huge crowd, they're headed to the Capitol, which is where you see there's still probably about 100, 150 people out here right now. So we're going to continue, obviously, to see if they're going to come back this way or not.
All right, thank you so much, Hope. Now, we do have team coverage tonight of the protest downtown. Joe Henke is walking with the protesters that just left the site from where Hope was, from Centennial Olympic Park to the Capitol now, Joe.
That's right, Aisha. This is the tail end of the crowd. You see the last few people coming through right now. As Hope mentioned, when the bicycle police stepped out of the way and those police APD officers in riot gear stepped in, that was really the switchover moment. And hundreds of people started the mile and a half walk back down towards the Capitol. You can see traffic now resuming here on Marietta, but as this crowd started going down Marietta, it shut down traffic as hundreds of people started marching. We followed that crowd for a good distance. We were down at that Capitol about an hour and a half ago. I can tell you it is surrounded by the National Guard and state police. Any idea of getting on the Capitol ground is not going to happen. It's most likely going to be another standoff like what we're seeing by Centennial Olympic Park, but they got about a mile and a half march to get down there. We're going to continue to follow the crowd, show you live what's going on down there coming up. But as Hope was saying, it was really that switchover moment when the heavy armor-wearing police stepped in, the crowd really churned. They started chanting, and for whatever reason, they decided that was their moment to leave and go back down towards the Capitol. Aisha?
All right, Joe, thank you. So we want to hear from the people who have been out there protesting over the last few days. We are where Atlanta speaks, and we want to just know, why are you rallying for George Floyd, or even on behalf of someone else? What is motivating you? Call us at 678-765-9514 and leave a voicemail there, but also be sure to give us your name and the best way for us to contact you, because we may use your message here on air.
Starting on Friday, Atlanta police say they arrested nearly 300 people during weekend demonstrations and we have seen more of those arrests today. The biggest number came Saturday when the mayor imposed that 9 p.m. curfew. Right now, we don't know the demographics of those who have been arrested or how many are from out of state. The department says it is working to break down those numbers for us. Well, this is the video, or rather part of the video of that incident that has been talked about so much on social media. A pair of Atlanta college students tased and dragged from a car during protest on Saturday night. That incident resulted in the firing of 2 Atlanta police officers, and criminal charges could be on the way. Today, those students spoke for the first time along with their representatives and their families. Our Andy Parati was there for that news conference.
Yeah, we sure did learn a lot from the couple and their attorneys, starting with the couple wasn't even involved with the protest. They were on their way home. Second, we learned that they are not quite ready to accept the mayor and the chief's apology. And Messiah Young, the young man driving, he suffered a fractured arm. Now, this all happened Saturday night just after 9:30 near Centennial Olympic Park. Body camera video shows Messiah Young attempting to start recording cell phone video of someone screaming and on the ground under arrest. The officers then asked the Morehouse College student to drive away, then get out of the car. And then on the other side of the car, when they eventually stop, officers surround Young's passenger, his girlfriend, Tania Pilgrim, a Spelman College student. In seconds, police broke the driver's side window, slashed the tires, and officers Ivory Streeter and Mark Garner deployed their tasers, shocking both of them for 10 full seconds each. Less than 24 hours later, the mayor and the police chief apologized and announced they had fired 2 officers. The young woman who was shocked, the passenger, listened to what she had to say just moments ago.
This is the most traumatic thing that has ever happened, and I hope ever happens again in my life. I'm very shaken up. I don't even know how to act, what to do. I just can't stop thinking about if cameras weren't there, or if they would have went a little bit further. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened. Like, it's all that keeps crossing my mind.
Now, the police chief has recognized this does not help their ability to calm fears right now in the African-American community as it relates to police brutality. The district attorney office is investigating whether charges will follow for the 2 officers. The attorneys for the young couple say that they also want some sort of action involving 3 other officers who are now on desk duty. You're going to hear a lot more from them coming up tonight at 11. Back to you.
Let's get you back with a live look from above. Look at this massive crowd outside of Centennial Olympic Park. This group has been marching throughout the afternoon. However, they are marching to the Capitol right now. You see just how large that crowd has gone. When we joined you at 5 o'clock on 11 Alive, it was a little bit sparse. And then as the day went on, maybe once people got off work, it really got large. Right now, J. Bell, I think they're outside of the...
Yeah, they're outside the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in the King Center near downtown. So this is this appears to be a separate group of protesters that are gathered right there in the road there. Again, this is near the King Center. So this appears to be a separate group of protesters. We're about an hour and 20 minutes away from the city of Atlanta's curfew that has been renewed again for another day that goes until sunrise tomorrow. So we will continue to monitor all of the various protests that we are seeing in the Atlanta area, and again monitor this another large crowd that we're finding out about and seeing, and in addition to the ones that Aisha was referencing that are closer to downtown near Centennial Olympic Park heading for the state capitol.
And this is what we have been seeing all day. It is 2 groups that are protesting right now, and both of those groups are getting larger. Protesters are pushing for criminal charges against all 4 fired officers involved in the death of George Floyd, and Minnesota's Attorney General says it's a possibility. Right now, only Derek Chauvin is charged in the case. He is facing 2 charges, including 3rd-degree murder. Attorney General Keith Ellison has been appointed to handle Floyd's case, and today on MSNBC, he said his office has not ruled out more charges.
We are reviewing all of the evidence. The public knows some things about the other officers, but there's a whole body of evidence that we're still reviewing. And so we have to make sure that we look at the facts and the law, and we will charge those cases, those individuals, to the highest degree of accountability that the law and the facts will support.
His comments comes just before the findings of an independent autopsy. It rules that officers in that video cut off blood and airflow to Floyd's brain, causing him to die. This is different than the report of the county medical examiner, who said there was no evidence of asphyxia. Video of the confrontation shows an officer, Officer Chauvin, kneeling on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes as he repeatedly said he could not breathe. So over the past few days, we have also been learning more about the culture and practices of the Minneapolis Police Department. NBC News went over police records for the past 5 years and found that officers used neck restraints 237 times. In 44 of those cases, the person being restrained became unconscious. That's about 16% of the time. Of those 44 cases, 3/5 of the individuals were black. The neck restraint you see Chauvin using in this video, it is not sanctioned by any department. That is according to more than a dozen police officials and law enforcement experts. And the department's policy on neck restraints, it hasn't been updated in 8 years.
Let's get now to some other local headlines tonight. 5 people have been detained in connection with a string of hit and runs in DeKalb County, one of which was deadly. The Marietta Police Department says they found the SUV involved in 3 incidents. Police say it was stolen from the victim of the first hit and run. That victim died. Later, a vehicle matching the same description ran into a family of 6 on their bikes, injuring a child. DeKalb County Police have now taken over the investigation. A man was shot and killed inside of a Walmart in DeKalb County. Police say 2 men started arguing when one, who was in his mid-60s, was shot inside that store. He died on his way to the hospital. Another man has been arrested in connection to the shooting, which is still under investigation. And Georgia's bars and clubs are allowed to reopen starting today. Open venues, though, do come with a lot of new required safety measures, like limiting crowds to 35% of normal occupancy. Overnight summer camps were also allowed to return on Sunday. For more details on the safety restrictions in place as Georgia continues to reopen, you can look for this story on 11alive.com.
All right, so let's not forget the pandemic, right? The next steps protesters should take to protect themselves from COVID-19.
And another live look. This is the group that we just saw momentarily, I believe, ago at the King Center near the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. It looks like they are on the move. We're working to find out more information about this group of protesters, but again, they are marching right now, as so many have over the last few days, in the honor of George Floyd and calling for social justice reform and also an end to racism.
Looks like a peaceful protest. This group has started to form and has gotten larger as we have gone into the 7:30 half hour. We're going to stick with this shot and bring you much more coming up after the break. Stay with us.
National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people, or are you doing this to make money, or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during prime time. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. on 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close.
We continue to follow multiple protests going through downtown Atlanta right now. We're going to take you to the ground where Joe Henke is with a group of protesters who are about a block away from the state capitol, Joe.
That's right, Aisha. If you go down to the end of the corner here and take a left, go up Mitchell Street, you'll run into the Capitol. Now, it's about a minute ago as we're getting close to the Capitol. Hundreds of people were ahead of us that had left Centennial Park going towards the Capitol. We heard several loud bangs, possibly some tear gas we're hearing up by the Capitol there, and the large crowd just started yelling the other way, and hundreds of people started running back towards Centennial Olympic Park. Right now you can see this crowd slowly leaving the Capitol. We were up by the Capitol about an hour and a half ago, and at that time they were ready for a crowd to arrive. The Capitol surrounded by the National Guard and state police. Right now you can see the protesters coming back towards us, chanting as they're heading back towards Centennial Olympic Park where they began their evening. Aisha.
All right, Joe, thank you. We're also watching in the upper right-hand side of our screen a separate protest that is happening right now, going past the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church there. Looking at the highway where officers looks like they are blocking that off. The highway had been a target for protesters a little bit earlier, right before the evening rush hour. But as you see, they're down below protesting on that road. All right, you say we're going to go back to Joe? Okay, so we're watching this crowd here as they make their way down. Again, protest has been peaceful, but we are about an hour and 10 minutes away from Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom's 9 p.m. curfew, J-Bill.
This group is heading into the Sweet Auburn district, that type of area in downtown. Not clear exactly where they might be heading, where their final destination is. It might be the route that we see sometimes during MLK celebrations, and that they might be heading towards the state capitol. But again, as we heard from Joe, there is a very large law enforcement presence already down there working to secure the state capitol. So we'll, of course, continue to stick with this group as well as the others that we have seen throughout the evening. Again, that other group right here at Centennial Olympic Park, rather, downtown. This has been almost the headquarters, rather, really, for the protesters that we have seen over the last few days. This is the spot where many of those protests take place, near Centennial Olympic Park and Marietta Street, not far from State Farm Arena. And again, as with most nights, we see the protesters standing face to face with the officers that are out there, sometimes speaking with them. And then we see many of them carrying signs. And so this is a similar scene to what we have seen for the last 4 days, rather. And so we will continue to kind of take you through these different shots as we are seeing more and more people join these various protests that are happening downtown.
So if you think about it, it's really three separate groups. One group has stayed outside of sort of the epicenter, outside of Centennial Olympic Park. They're face to face with the National Guard officers, and Hope said that's when the tension sort of, started to get a little bit higher versus earlier, when they saw the presence of the more militarized crews out there. So once the National Guard was introduced, a lot of them took the stance to say, well, why are you here? Why are you being deployed against us? Because we are being peaceful. We know Governor Kemp has backed Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms with bringing in the National Guard for the purpose of crowd control and really making those larger number of arrests as the curfew goes into effect. And then we have the group that's marching to the state capitol where Joe is. And then this seems to be our third group that's going through downtown Atlanta near the Auburn Avenue area. So it seems that they've really broken off. And that's what we were talking about in regards to these protests, that there is a no clear goal or leader here. They're sort of in multiple groups, and that's really made it difficult to sort of track exactly what's going on. So we have this shot from above. I'm trying to get a look. J-Bill, could you see what that street sign said?
I missed it, but we do see that they're getting closer and entering Georgia State University's campus, part of that, because you could kind of see the school's logo there on the street. And again, we are tracking many protests that have been taking place. Today, we also had a group outside of Atlanta City Hall earlier. That's the group that tried to enter the downtown connector but after some discussions with law enforcement, agreed to head back in the opposite direction. We had our Doug Richards out there on that scene earlier today. So it's not clear if some of those protesters that were out earlier this afternoon are now out here as part of these other various protests that are going on. What we do know and what we can say is that there are still those multiple groups, and that those groups have been getting larger and larger as the hours have gone on through the day. Again, largely peaceful. We did see some arrests earlier today with that group that was marching towards the downtown connector. We saw some of those arrests as they headed back into the downtown area. But again, a lot of people who are holding these various protests that we have seen over the last few days have wanted them to remain peaceful. Over the weekend, we saw some in Kennesaw, we saw some in Athens, we understand there were some down in Savannah, we saw some in Marietta, and so a lot of people really wanting to make their voices heard on these issues that we are seeing with racism, on the issue of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, and of George Floyd. A lot of folks really feeling that now is the time for them to get involved and to say something. And a lot of the themes that we have been seeing and hearing from some of the people that we spoke with today is that I have an African-American child. I'm concerned daily for them. We heard from a father that was speaking with our Hope Ford, who said he was out there and his phone rang from his son and he was very scared. He was crying when he spoke to Hope, saying he was scared that something might have happened to his son with that phone call. And so that is a feeling that a lot of people have told us they are experiencing, and a motivation for them to come out and be a part of these protests.
And a lot of people are having their own experience. They're having shared experiences with strangers, but they're also having their own experience by taking the moment to go up to law enforcement or members of the National Guard one-on-one and express themselves and have the conversations. And in a lot of instances we've captured on video, the officers were willing to have that dialogue to them, be it they walk up to the officers or the officers walk up to them. There are some people who are just too enraged about the state and the status of where things are in our country to have those conversations at the moment. So there are a lot of different experiences happening within this crowd. We do understand that Joe Hankey is on the ground and they have officially made it to the state capitol. We're going to go back out to Joe and see what the scene is there.
That's right, Aisha. They got as close to the Capitol as they can. They never fully made it there. You can see right behind me here, this crowd, about 100 feet in front of me, that's as far as they can get. There's state police there holding the line, keeping everyone about a full city block away from the Capitol. As we were getting close around the corner here, we could hear people starting to run, yelling, other way, other way. At that time, tear gas was shot off at the crowd. There's some more people running right now. There was a loud sound, but it looks like that was just someone actually banging their skateboard on the ground there, which startled the crowd after that tear gas was shot just a short time ago. As we came around the corner here, the scene was clear. There's not any visible tear gas in the air, but the wind is bringing it from the state capitol our direction. We sort of caught the tail end of that, nothing strong whatsoever, but there was a lot of people at that time assisting other people, milk, saline, water, something they were spraying in each other's eyes to try to control that tear gas. The group right here, a lot of them now kneeling down, chanting, holding their line here in front of the police. A good portion of the crowd, though, when they fell back after that tear gas was shot, they started running back in the direction toward Centennial Olympic Park, down where Hope Ford is. But right now, this is the scene here. Looks like they have no route to the state capitol, but for the moment, at least, they're planning to stay here and chant with the police directly in their face. Aisha.
Thank you. Make sure you get to a safe location. We saw a young lady right behind Joe wiping her eyes there after that tear gas. Getting as close as they possibly could to the state capitol. Crews have already been set up throughout the day, so they are, Joe said, about a full city block away. And we see this crowd that remain at what we've been calling sort of the epicenter near Centennial Olympic Park on Marietta Street. They are remaining there, standing face to face with those National Guard members who have made their line and not letting anyone go beyond that point. And so the group has broken off now to 3 separate locations all throughout downtown, and this has been going on. Our crews have been out there since about 4 o'clock when one of those groups tried to make it onto the interstate before the evening rush hour. And you think about a lot of people who were working from home, and COVID-19 is still a thing. And we really started to see this as people are back to work now. This crowd intensified once we hit around the 6 o'clock hour, with a lot of people getting off of work or hearing where people were protesting. So that's when we started to really see this crowd. It seems like from the aerial shots, it at least doubled, J. Bell.
Yeah, and this is quite a significant increase from what we saw even yesterday in terms of the crowd size out there. And we see people right here lying down in the street, right across from law enforcement's presence. I can't quite tell what agency or that is right there, but they are surrounding parts of the State House. You see that gentleman there kind of on his knees with his hands behind his head, a position that you might expect to see someone in if they were in the middle of an encounter with law enforcement. And so that is what we are seeing with several of these people out there. That's also a scene similar to what we saw on Sunday. We saw people lying down on the middle of the 17th Street Bridge, just a couple of blocks away from Atlantic Station, and in protest, rather. We saw them taking that position, some of them sitting down, others lying on their stomach in the position that was the final moments of George Floyd, on his stomach with his arms behind his back. Here we see several people with their arms raised over their heads, others kneeling again, just in a face-off moment here with the law enforcement presence that is there. That might be some members of the State Patrol. We also know that the Georgia National Guard has been responding to these protesters as well. So we are seeing various ways that people are protesting and expressing themselves out here. I know Aisha had mentioned earlier COVID-19, and so we are seeing various people, some of them wearing masks as they are protesting out here. And again, we see them laying down right there, lying down and on their knees. Earlier today, we did see some officers also take a knee, kneel with some of the protesters. They were out in the crowd asking those law enforcement officers to kneel along with them. And so some of them did do that. We hear from our Hope Ford. These are those images from earlier today. We did hear from our Hope Ford, who was out there when that happened, that it was appreciated by many of the protesters, but everyone did not appreciate that moment. They did not like to see the law enforcement officers kneeling along with them in protests. So some very different feelings that we are seeing from those protesters, that we are hearing from them, because this is a very personal matter for many of them. And we're seeing different reactions and different forms of their protests as they're out there. Again, we've seen many that have been peaceful. We saw some over the weekend that included various church groups with people praying and singing with one another as well. We're looking right now again at that protest that headed towards the state capitol, and many more of them are lying down on the ground right now in that position. Again, that was George Floyd's final moments 1 week ago today in Minneapolis, as he was detained and later died in police custody. Jeff Hellinger joining me now. Jeff, this is something that we have been monitoring, tracking over the last 4 days. This is the third day now that we are seeing this curfew from the city of Atlanta, an effort to deter some possible violence with these protests. We're about an hour from that now.
It has been a tale of two cities, and City 1, as we hear the alarm going off right now, that is to make sure that everyone in the city of Atlanta knows this is a public safety alert that can be seen on all iPhones, iPads, various means of communication, that the city begins its curfew in less than 1 hour now, about 58 minutes. And it will continue through sunrise tomorrow. It will be the fourth day of the curfew. And Jennifer, as we were saying a moment ago, it has been a tale of two cities. And this fact that what happens during the daylight hours is significantly different once it gets dark. So it takes on a totally different dynamic once nighttime falls. We see more aggressive policing. We see more aggressive protesters. And some of the incidents that we have seen that have been so troubling, so violent, so controversial have all come at night. They've not come during the daylight hours.
That's right, Jeff, and really it's interesting to see because it kind of seemed like things were perhaps taking a downward trend. We saw fewer people participating in some of these protests, it seems, on Sunday. But the crowd here that you're seeing at Centennial Olympic Park near that area seems to have grown within the last maybe 20 minutes or so, and we know that a large portion of the crowd that had been there earlier left this location to march towards the state capitol. That's that group we were just seeing with those that were lying down in the street, those that were kneeling. And so we also know that in addition to those two groups, we saw that large group that had left and that had gathered at the King Center near historic Ebenezer Baptist Church and had begun to march through the Sweet Auburn area, likely on their way to the state capitol as well. And so a very large amount of people that we are seeing that have mobilized today to be a part of these protests. Again, even that group that we saw protesting at Atlanta's City Hall earlier today.
There have been developments over the last hour and a half or so. Among them, we have heard from President Trump, who was speaking from the White House, which has been under siege for 2 nights, of which he had been taken to a bunker on Saturday night. And he told a news conference today that was carried by NBC and 11 Alive, in part, quote, "I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. If governors refuse to quell the violence, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them." As far as the state response here in Georgia, it began with Governor Kemp a few days ago saying that 500 National Guardsmen would be used, and then that went to 1,500, and now it stands at 3,000. The state of emergency is in effect until the weekend, and they will reassess that once again to see if some of the civil unrest certainly either slows or dissipates a bit during the course of the week, but that is one of those issues that certainly is a wild card at this point. We, watch this. We do not know how it will evolve, but we do know that Governor Kemp told me on Saturday night that the state certainly will have, as he said, Chief Shields, the Atlanta Police Department, Police Chief, and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, who said there would be a zero tolerance for any kind of violence, and they will put an end to that very quickly. And the governor promised that he would do that in tandem with Mayor Bottoms and also Chief Shields.
And heading in today, we know that there were nearly 300 people that were arrested in connection with these various protests since Friday. We did see some other folks being taken into custody earlier today. That was with the group that was protesting around Atlanta City Hall. They had again marched towards the downtown connector, spoke with law enforcement, decided against taking that action, and were heading back towards the Atlanta City Hall. And at that point, we began to see some people taken into custody there. So we do know that those numbers will increase. A big question has been, do some of these people that are participating in the protest actually live here in Atlanta? Do they live in the metro Atlanta area? Are they coming from out of state? We do know that the Atlanta Police Department says that they are working on the demographics of the people that have been arrested so far. They're working on the numbers of the people who may have come from different parts of the state or different parts of the country. And so we will bring you that information as soon as we get it from Atlanta Police. But again, that is something that they are working, as nearly 300 people have been arrested over the weekend as a result of participation in some form or fashion with these protests or the curfews that have been put in place as a result.
Jennifer, can you tell where, is that Marietta Street? Is that what we're looking at right now? It's kind of cut off on the television set.
Yeah,
that I'm looking
this is
at.
Marietta Street. This is that area near.
So that's McCormick Schmick there over on the right that had been damaged on Friday night into Saturday morning. And if you are just watching and you're kind of trying to figure out the lay of the land, so to speak, as to where the protesters are in relation to downtown and where they have been, as you take a look at your screen right now, and you can see at the top the law enforcement presence. I believe that's the National Guard up there.
I do believe that's the National Guard.
Which
as
is what we've not seen. That's not APD.
Well, it looks like there is a law enforcement presence that is butted up right against the edge of protesters.
You know, I'm going to stand up away from our set here.
Yeah, it's a little tricky where you're not too close, but it does look like there's Atlanta police possibly right there, right against where those protesters are in the middle of that intersection. Then there's that space, and I believe that is where we see the National Guard.
Yeah, that is
right
the National
under that
Guard.
white box there in the top left. As we move away from that view there, we are now looking directly, I believe, into Centennial Olympic Park as we kind of continue to swerve around there. But people have just been milling about for some extent there. But we may end up seeing some of those crowds that had marched towards the state capitol returning. It does look like there might be some other people coming from that opposite direction towards the top of your screen. It does look like there might be some people coming down the street.
I'm going to make sure I qualify too that we say Georgia National Guard. Oftentimes we hear National Guard used, but the correct term is Georgia National Guard. You know, these are men and women that are residents of our state. Many of them are in law enforcement as well. We're going to go to Hope Ford right now. Hope, as we always like to begin with you, as you are a reporter always on the move, very mobile. Give us a view as to where you are standing right now and your location as far as our live broadcast.
So we are right at the corner of Centennial Olympic Park and Marietta Street. A lot of these protesters, they did go to the Capitol about 30 minutes ago, and it looks like they're all headed back to this area. The reason they're headed back to this area, this is where one of the largest police and Georgia National Guard presences is at the moment. So you can see down there, you can see all those protesters coming back this way as they leave the Capitol and head back over here. This has been kind of the start and end point for the protests over the last 4 days, and it seems that today is no different, as we've seen this crowd kind of continue to gather here again on the corner of Centennial Olympic Park and Marietta Street. Someone actually has a flag out there as well, and we see that there's guardsmen. They're in the park right there. Behind this crowd of protesters, there's the line of police officers, and then further back is a huge presence from the Georgia National Guard. So it's about an hour until curfew. And we see this large group coming back out here. I know that my phone just went off with the curfew alert not too long ago, and I heard it out here from a lot of different phones as well. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. I do want to say we've been out here since about 4 o'clock, and this has been a peaceful protest. There's been passionate debates, but it has continued to be peaceful for well over 4 hours now. We've seen the police officers come out into the crowd and kneel with them at several points. We've seen the police officers come out and talk to the protesters. We've seen protesters have passionate debates back and forth between them about the correct way to make change and to protest. But everything has been peaceful out here tonight. The crowd has grown, going to continue to grow since 4 o'clock, and that's what we're seeing right here, right now, is this crowd continue to grow as they head back from the Capitol right now.
Can you hear me, Hope? It's Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
You have spent probably more time.
I can hear you.
You've spent probably more time among protesters than anybody on Atlanta television over the last 4 nights. Can you take a temperature for us? Is the crowd angrier? Are they different tonight than they were last night or the night before or Friday night? What does it feel like, and what is the vibe that you get?
Tonight, from what I've felt from, again, since being here since 4 o'clock today to now and covering protests all weekend long, this crowd is very passionate. They are very, very passionate. There's been very little anger. You know, you have those emotions that'll rise, and there have been a couple of protesters that have gone up to police. They've cried, they've yelled, never disrespectful towards police officers. And you've seen that type of energy to here tonight. But for the most part, it's been just extreme passion, and everyone out here wants change. So this is probably one of the most peaceful, outside of probably the Jaylen Brown protest on Saturday. This has probably been one of the most peaceful one of the most people for the longest amount of time. Again, for 4 hours now, we've seen them, and that's the thing. You're probably wondering, well, why do they keep going to the Capitol and coming back? They've done that a few times today, and the reason they've done that is organizers have seen when those tensions begin to rise, they'll say, all right, we need to walk, we need to march, we need to get this energy out. So that's what they've been kind of trying to do to kind of keep those keep everyone's temperatures down and kind of keep everyone in a good place to get their message across. So that's why they've been marching back and forth between the Capitol and here at Centennial Olympic Park and Marietta Street.
So I hear you talk about organizing.
And actually right there, right now,
100 white supremacists in this crowd ready to start.
yeah, so that's actually one of the guys right there, up there in the red shirt. He's been continuing to talk to police. He's been continuing to keep the protesters moving along. He's been talking to everyone out here tonight. He's been just in this crowd, making sure that everyone's heard, that no one is getting talked over. So at some point in time, I am going to try to get to him to find out who he is, because he has been one of the ones that's been out here tonight that's really been keeping everybody just together and unified in that message.
All right, Hope, thank you so much. We'll give you some time so you can maybe get to him and some others. Let's go now to Joe Hinkie. Joe was walking with those protesters as they headed to the state capitol. Joe, what's the scene like now? Have they all departed? Are we're starting to see some of them arrive back out at Centennial Olympic Park. What's the sense of what's going on there now?
That's right, Jennifer. All the protesters have now departed the Capitol. They did that about mile-long march from Centennial Olympic Park here towards the Capitol. What they were met with was state police, as you can see here. They're now standing down, calmer demeanor here from the state police. But when the protesters got to the Capitol, they were cut off about a half block, full city block from the Capitol by a line of state police whose job is basically to keep the protesters off state property. Don't let them reach the Capitol. When those protesters got close to that police line, we were around the corner. We didn't see if there was anything to instigate the police. But at that time, tear gas was shot. We were downwind. We caught the tail end of that. It was not bad by any means where we were standing, but we saw a lot of protesters all of a sudden start yelling, other way, other way. They ran. We could see people, a lot of tears in their eyes. People were spraying milk, water, saline, some sort of solution to help clean that out. About half the crowd left at that time. The other half, they stayed here. They sat through that tear gas. They then laid down, a good amount of them laid down in the ground, or on the ground in front of the police, and started chanting, "What's his name? George Floyd." They kept chanting that over and over again. They sat there for about 5-10 minutes, and then all of a sudden everyone just got up. They left. They walked back towards Centennial Olympic Park, where Hope Ford is right now, and at that time the state police, they waited for a couple minutes until the last protesters were gone, and then they themselves fell back. You can see them behind me here now taking off their masks, their gas masks, and basically relaxing, waiting for protesters eventually, possibly to come back this direction. At that time, we could assume they would then fall back into that line to cut off the protesters.
So, hey, Joe, sorry, we're seeing some vehicles around there. How's traffic being accessible out there for folks who maybe live or work or going about their normal business out here, maybe trying to get home before that curfew?
Absolutely. As far as traffic goes, when there was that wall of protesters and that wall of police at that time, there was no traffic allowed along Mitchell Street here going towards the Capitol. As you can see, they still have Washington Street at Mitchell here blocked off right at the Capitol. But the surrounding streets, Trinity, on the other side of the state Capitol here going back towards 85 and 75, traffic is moving there just fine. It's just wherever the protesters are. When we were going down Marietta, for example, traffic was following behind the protesters, so it was just going a matter of miles per hour. But as you can see, law enforcement, they're quickly driving around the area here trying to cut off protesters, stay on the sides, the side streets around the protesters to keep everyone safe. But traffic moving slowly, but there are many streets that are still open.
Joe, I'm sorry, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jennifer. I'm sorry.
Does it seem as if police are kind of escorting them at all as they're moving between Centennial Olympic Park and the state capitol? Because we had kind of seen some of that yesterday as protesters were moving through Midtown, that there was a police presence behind them. So I'm wondering if there's any of that today.
You know, very little from what we're seeing. Maybe sometimes as we're going along with protesters, you can see them a block over, and that's more so police driving from, you know, the Capitol to Centennial Olympic Park to catch them on the other end. But as far as the street when they were coming down Marietta in one direction, there was very little police presence on that street. With that said, everyone was remaining calm. They were peaceful. They were chanting. They were going down the street, actually in the street, not using the sidewalk. But there was really no reason for alarm. Everyone was safe. There was very little traffic. No cars were trying to cut off the crowd to create any safety problems.
All right, I think we have an issue
we might
with
have
Joe.
lost Joe.
Him, yeah.
We'll try and reestablish our connection with him. I was going to ask him a couple of questions. I have some curiosity about if there is any police presence, 2 blocks away is City Hall, and
on
also
the opposite side.
Yeah, off Trinity is over at Fulton County, as well as the courts are over there. So maybe we can get an answer to that to see if there is some security there to make sure that there is not any damage against those symbols of government here in the municipality as well as the county. So we'll see if we can get answers to that. I've also noticed that some of the law enforcement that we're seeing is decidedly mixed. We're talking about Georgia National Guard, as we have, Atlanta Police, obviously, but we're seeing corrections officers as well.
Yeah, I noticed that on the shields down there by the state capitol.
They have that prison body armor on that you oftentimes see when they are trying to roust a prisoner who may be disruptive or having mental issues in some of those cells. And we are also seeing other agencies involved with man and women power that have been involved. We've seen those trucks from Clayton County that have Sheriff Victor Hill on the side of them. So it is a conglomeration, if you will, of law enforcement taking part in this operation. And again, there are 3,000 Georgia National Guards, men and women, that are involved with the operation of trying to keep Atlanta and surrounding areas safe. We will see if those numbers grow. I think that's one of the interesting aspects of, as we follow the week, we've seen Governor Kemp grow that from 500 to 1,500 to double it again to 3,000. And again, I asked him on Saturday if that number might grow. You keep doubling the number. Could it be 6,000 by the time that we get to the end of the week? And he was somewhat vague, taking a stance of wait and see. But again, we'll use that term over and over here that has been used by the mayor, by the Atlanta police chief, and certainly by the governor, and that's zero tolerance of any kind of property damage or any kind of violence.
And Jeff, you have to think that they're weighing the coronavirus situation, the pandemic as well, because we do know that Georgia National Guard members have been responding to the pandemic as well. We've heard a lot from the governor about them going in some of these nursing and long-term care facilities and doing work there. So we're seeing that work being done, and now we're seeing this work from the Georgia National Guard as well. Right here on your screen, this is a look at Andrew Young International Boulevard, and you can see, in addition to those Georgia National Guard members, that you can see their vehicles back there behind them. And Jeff, when you talk about all of the various agencies that are responding, we're also seeing Georgia State troopers that are involved in this as well. Last night we saw a large contingency of troopers that were patrolling, kind of monitoring and moving around the downtown area on ATVs as the curfew approached and came and went, and as they were tracking where the groups of people were and trying to disperse them. So that's another agency that's been very visible, helping with this situation, and another tool with those ATVs that we're seeing. And I would not be surprised if we saw that as well once again later on tonight as we get closer and move beyond that 9 p.m. curfew.
And it is by their jurisdiction to protect the freeways, by the very nature of the Georgia State Highway Patrol. That's where their jurisdiction falls. So I know in the various protests that we've seen over the years, they have been the ones to ensure that protesters not make it out onto the freeways, to ensure for their safety and that of motorists as well. So you can be sure tonight that they will be on guard in an effort to make sure that no pedestrians, no protesters, no one on foot is certainly making their way onto Atlanta's very, very fast interstates.
Yeah, and if you were with us earlier in the evening or on 11 Alive on our other channel 11, you did see some of those trooper vehicles blocking entrances to the highway as protesters were making their way through various streets downtown. So that is certainly something we have been seeing throughout the past few days as we have been watching these protests, because we did see some folks on Friday night try to get onto the highway. Maybe a few did actually make it there, but we did see that trooper presence, that law enforcement presence when those protesters tried to get onto the highway. That was in the the northbound lanes of 75, 85 near the Varsity. And so we have seen them try to block that and prevent that. We saw some on Sunday when we had the protesters lying on the 17th Street Bridge. We had people blocking the ramps, accessing that bridge as a result of that particular protest, though we're seeing all of that reaction and response as the protest takes place in various parts of the city.
And the other issue, it's impossible to sit here night after night the way that you and I do, and we have a lot of thoughts, just like the protesters themselves, like law enforcement, like those of you at home that are watching. But when you think about our coverage over the last 12 weeks about COVID-19 and the dangers of COVID-19 and trying to get it to flatten the curve and how we all should shelter in place and wear masks and gloves, and we go to Publix and Kroger and we have to take our bread out of bags because the CDC has told us that the coronavirus can live on the plastic, putting our meats in Ziploc bags, all of this in an effort to try and flatten the curve. But then you take a look at the civil unrest in the United States over the course of the last 5 or 6 days, and you see people in mass gathered from Salt Lake City to Oklahoma City to Seattle to Boston to Philadelphia to Chicago to Denver to Dallas to Austin to Birmingham to Atlanta to Miami to Jacksonville, Charlotte. You pick a city. There's 115 cities in the United States that have had these mass protests. And yet some are wearing masks, but certainly, the majority are probably not. I mean, that close proximity certainly gives you fear for the potential of spreading this pandemic in a way that maybe was unimaginable a couple of months ago when that was the only concern. But now, as we take a look at so much going on in the United States as far as protest, oftentimes violence, oftentimes battling with law enforcement, it is impossible not to have great concerns.
Yeah, and this does come at a time when many states and local governments were starting to reopen and ease some of those restrictions. So that is all coupled in with that, and coupled in with the various holidays, Memorial Day weekend that we saw on Monday, and then this quickly happened as a result of George Floyd's death on Memorial Day. And so we'll have to continue to watch that. We did speak with our medical correspondent, Dr. Sujatha Reddy, and I think the main concern is with these protests, we're seeing a lot of people shouting, singing, yelling, screaming, and then being in close proximity with each other, and that is the recipe for spreading those droplets.
Dr. Fauci, as much as a month ago, was saying that people shouldn't be singing in church, that one of the easy transmissions of COVID is by choirs, that we have to stop choirs, we have to stop singing in church. And as you mentioned, you've got all of these people out there certainly singing at times and shouting and all of that, and the transmission factor of that certainly is, it gives us all pause for great concern.
Yeah, and that was something that we did hear from Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, telling folks to go out and get a coronavirus test if they have been participating in these protests as well. Let's shift gears a little bit, because we have heard from President Donald Trump. He delivered formal remarks regarding the protests in the wake of George Floyd's death while in custody. And he is invoking the Insurrection Act of 1807, and that means the president can deploy the military. So here's the first few moments of his remarks that he made just a short time ago.
Thank you very much. My fellow Americans, my first and highest duty as president is to defend our great country and the American people. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of our nation, and that is exactly what I will do. All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street, or the woman in upstate New York viciously attacked by dangerous thugs. Small business owners have seen their dreams utterly destroyed. New York's finest have been hit in the face with bricks. Brave nurses who have battled the virus are afraid to leave their homes. A police precinct has been overrun here in the nation's capital. The Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial have been vandalized. One of our most historic churches was set ablaze. A federal officer in California, an African-American enforcement hero, was shot and killed. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror. The destruction of innocent life and the spilling of innocent blood is an offense to humanity and a crime against God. America needs creation, not destruction. Cooperation, not contempt. Security, not anarchy. Healing, not hatred. Justice, not chaos. This is our mission, and we will succeed. 100%, we will succeed. Our country always wins. That is why I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights.
Those remarks from President Donald Trump earlier today, shortly after about 6:30 in an address from the Rose Garden in Washington, D.C., responding in part to some of the protests that we have seen there in the nation's capital as well as all over the country. We do know that that curfew is here in Atlanta. There's a curfew as well in Washington, D.C. I believe that one was set to begin at 7 o'clock. One in Atlanta at 9. Yesterday we saw one in the city of Athens following protests there as well, and down in Savannah where I believe there were also some Georgia National Guard members that had been deployed down there as well. Right now, this is a live look out at Marietta Street. Again, this is near Centennial Olympic Park, where the crowd has grown in size since we saw some of those folks return from that march to the state capitol. So we're going to try and get you to one of our reporters as soon as we can. I believe they're telling me right now our Hope Ford is ready. Hope, what's the scene like out there? It's 8:30 now, maybe about 30 minutes away from the city's curfew. Are we seeing anybody starting to depart, or what's the scene like out there?
We've been seeing like a handful of people walking in different directions, kind of leaving. But as you can see over there, that crowd is still pretty thick. There's still a lot of people over there. The Guard has actually moved, the Georgia National Guard, has actually moved up a little bit closer to that police line that we've seen throughout the past few hours. And there's still people out here that are actively protesting, even with that 30 minutes left. People have, like I said, to kind of start to back up a little bit, but there's still a lot of people out here. And as we've seen the last couple of nights with the curfew in place, at 8:59, they start moving that line and they start firing tear gas. They start trying to disperse this crowd in any way that they can. So with 30 minutes left, it'll be interesting to see how this crowd either shrinks or grows in the next 30 minutes.
As I take a look at these pictures, and they are making sure that no one makes it up onto that bridge, I keep drifting back to your coverage on Friday when Atlanta police had parked all those cruisers on that area up there by CNN with full access to all of the protesters. And of course, violence broke out. 9 of those vehicles were damaged in that. They certainly have learned the lesson not to allow any access up towards CNN and to keep them back on Marietta Street, where they have an easier time to at least try and push them along Centennial Olympic Park Drive, that whole area through there.
Yeah, we can actually take a quick walk over there to kind of show you a little bit that area that you're talking about, because since Friday, for the last 2 days, 3 days now, that whole area back there has been filled with police officers. That's where they've been setting up. That's where they've been keeping the SWAT, Georgia National Guard. That's where they've been keeping the tanks. That's also where they're keeping the buses. That's where they're processing people that they're arresting after that curfew time. So on Friday, you're right, that whole area right there was filled with protesters. And every day since, that entire area has been filled with law enforcement. And it is, again, filled with law enforcement right now. And just to give you a better look, again, of what this crowd looks like on this side of it, you can see still a lot of people out here. And there's still a lot of people that are face-to-face with those officers as well. And if they don't start to move back, you know, when 8:59 hits, as we've seen over the last couple of days, that's when they start to move that line and when they start to fire off tear gas at that point.
So, Hope, what is your sense of their purpose as they sort of mill about? You know, they're not marching, they're sort of standing there as though they themselves are waiting and anticipating what will happen in the next 27 minutes of being moved out there. It has turned into simply a gathering and you know, just sort of standing near law enforcement. Is that how it has worked as we have come close to the curfew hour?
Well, as you can see, I mean, okay, we're going to get out the way a little bit.
Well, I think there's your answer right there. Hope we'll take it.
Okay.
Hope,
we're okay.
go. Yep, get out of that area, Hope, and we'll take it from here. Jennifer?
That appears to be something that we have seen just every few minutes, maybe not few minutes rather, but maybe every 20, 25 minutes, especially as the evening goes on, as we've been watching these protests the last few days. Something, some noise, some comment, something will happen, and we'll see large numbers. You see right there some of the people taking off. We'll see people running in a different direction. And we do want to tell you, Hope, we just heard from her. She says she is okay. But again, we see a large number of the folks running there. And I'm not sure if we have seen something that was deployed from law enforcement. Yes, we're seeing some, maybe some tear gas or something. You see that right there towards the bottom middle of your screen there. And so it is 8:34, less than half an hour until the city of Atlanta's curfew. Here's another live vantage point for you. And as we get closer to the curfew, it seems we start to see action from law enforcement to disperse the crowd, to go ahead and start getting them moving. And according to some of our reports over the last few days, that has been frustrating for the protesters who say we're being peaceful, we aren't in violation of the curfew at this point. But we do start seeing some of this back and forth between protesters and law enforcement the closer we get to 9 p.m. And so it seems that we're starting to see that right now. So if what we're about to see right now continues to hold with what we have seen over the last few days, then in addition to those folks running away as they see the tear gas being deployed into the crowd, we'll see the crowds start to come back. And if you're looking to the left, the bottom left of your screen, you can see folks returning to that skirmish line of law enforcement officers. And so that's something that we're just going to have to keep watching, especially as we approach 9 o'clock. It does look like there's some sparkling out there. Again, we did say that Hope is okay. So let's go back out to her. Hope, what's going on out there?
Okay, so now those tensions have risen. The curfew doesn't take into effect until 9 o'clock, and you just saw just a few minutes ago, and that is tear gas that they fired off. So we're going to kind of move back a little bit, but as soon as they deployed that tear gas, they deployed fireworks. You see now they're throwing things. So they're really trying to push those people out ahead of time. That's why people are running, trying to get out of there right now. There seems to be a little bit of a fight towards that headline. They are popping off fireworks to, I'm not sure if that's the protesters or the police. Excuse me, there's tear gas in the air right now, but so you can kind of see there right now, that line is clear. That line was clear whenever they first fired off that tear gas a little bit ago, but people, they immediately came right back to that line. So it seems, and again, I've been out here since Friday, it seems that every time the police try to disperse those crowds and they try to move them back with tear gas or rubber bullets or whatever, that angers the crowd. That angers some people in the crowd, and then they go right back. So that's kind of what we saw here not too long ago. It seems that crowd has kind of moved back, and you can see the shields have come out for the police right there. It's interesting, and there they go. They're moving forward.
All right, here they go. They're coming forward right now.
Maybe 20 minutes ago. Yeah, 20 minutes ago, these officers were kneeling with the protesters, and now 20 minutes later, they're trying to move that line forward. They're telling us to stay kind of out the way. We're gonna move a little bit back.
We are 22 minutes away from the 9 o'clock curfew, and we have seen this over the last few nights when it was instituted, that as we get closer to 9 o'clock, the police, law enforcement, the Georgia National Guard, the Highway Patrol as well, the Georgia State Patrol, they become more involved.
And there's the Guard moving in right there.
And that's something that we've
seen as well. The Guard is moving in, Georgia National Guard moving in right behind them.
Yeah, we see them kind of move closer and closer and move beyond that skirmish line, that original line right there on that backside of Marietta Street. We do see them advance, and then we start to see them take over the entire intersection and clear it out. And you see that officer right there, Hope, with all of the zip ties. We can likely expect more folks to be taken into custody once we hit that 9 o'clock hour, if not before.
Hey, Hope, you showed us about 25 minutes ago an organizer, a big guy who was wearing red, who was on top of a vehicle. Do you see any organizers now that are in the middle of this as law enforcement starts to advance?
I don't right now. I did talk to that gentleman who was on the car. He told me he was not an organizer, but he felt like he needed to take it upon himself to keep order, make sure that people weren't getting violent, and that make sure people were looking out for anyone trying to instigate violence, because he wanted to make sure that we were keeping this protest peaceful, and he wanted to make sure that they weren't inciting violence. So that's why he kind of took it upon himself. So I did talk to him. I haven't seen him since I talked to him probably about 15 minutes ago now. So we kind of see, again, we're seeing that. We've seen this for the last few nights, some of the protesters coming back up to that line, and as we've seen the last 3 nights, when they do that, the police are not going to let them gather. They're going to push them back because they want them to obey by that curfew. So it's going to be interesting to see what they're going to do. Right now, they're just going to walk forward, or if they're going to deploy more tear gas.
And a reminder that the vehicles back there are armored personnel carriers, and that is the vehicle that is being used tonight, or that is certainly in the area of Centennial Olympic Park from the Georgia National Guard.
And we do see some of those Georgia National Guard members moving into place behind or right along with the Atlanta police officers that are right out there, all of them with their shields and their face masks with gas masks on. So we can anticipate likely more of that tear gas to be deployed into the crowd as we get closer to 9 o'clock. We're 20 minutes out now from the city's curfew. Again, not too long ago, about 40 minutes ago, we had those phone alerts going on. We do know that there have also been billboards placed around the city, letting folks know, making sure they are aware of the curfew. And again, Police Chief Erica Shields saying that curfew is to serve as a tool to help them kind of weed people out and know who's still around there that may not have the best intentions. And so we will begin to see that as we get closer and closer to 9 p.m. Right now, the chanting continues.
No
yes.
Justice.
I don't know if you guys can still hear me, but from what I'm seeing, there's only a small group that is still here right now. majority of the group is either left or they're farther down Centennial Olympic Park Drive right now. But there is still a small group that has come back up to this line of police officers. And as we've seen over the past couple of nights, they do not let them gather for that long, especially as it gets closer to that 9 o'clock hour. But for the most part, majority of those protesters are either gone or they're way down Centennial Olympic Park at this point.
And right now, this is an overhead view of that area where Hope is. Hope would kind of be standing to the bottom of the screen, out of the frame. That skirmish line that you see with the people that were right there in that crosswalk, that is where the remaining protesters are in relation to the officers that had advanced through that intersection. And again, this kind of follows and stays true to what we have been seeing from the Atlanta police as we approach 9 o'clock. Right there to the right of your screen is that billboard. You can't really see all of it, but you see that 9P, and that is the notification that the curfew is quickly approaching here in the city of Atlanta. If you look down further in the street, you can see what appears to be some other law enforcement vehicles with their lights flashing in the distance. That will be likely officers kind of monitoring the area between where we see the protesters here and farther in the distance leaving the city. Something interesting that we saw yesterday was protesters creating a makeshift barricade out of materials from a construction site. And so we'll be watching tonight to see if there's any other action similar to that we see from these protesters as we are in night 4 of watching these demonstrations in downtown Atlanta.
You know, as you take a look at this area, I keep thinking about over the weekend where Atlanta police were allowing traffic. You remember the traffic patterns that would come down Centennial Olympic Park Drive here, and then they would exit onto Lucky Street, or they would make their way toward Marietta Street and be able to, we don't see any of that tonight. I think the ATV mishap that occurred with the individual who was intoxicated certainly has put an end to that you know, you don't see any traffic tonight. You don't see any of that. They also were allowing, as we recall over the weekend, they were allowing protesters would park in that paid parking that's right off Lucky Street, just beyond the Waffle House, right through that area across from Centennial Olympic Park. So theoretically, they drive, they park, they walk, they protest, and then they get back in their vehicles and they take off again. They're not allowing that this time.
And this is another shot. This is along Andrew Young International Boulevard. You see one person kneeling there with their arms up, another person standing there. This is just around the other side, I believe, of where we were possibly seeing Hope. Not really a lot of people right here. We do see those two protesters right there, maybe some other folks coming to join them walking in the street. But again, it does appear as if that initial action that we saw maybe about 5 minutes ago from law enforcement, that disbursement of the tear gas, does seem to have been somewhat effective in dispersing part of that crowd, because what we are seeing in terms of who remains out there is a far fewer in number. And that's very striking considering the number of people that we saw out there earlier that had been marching back and forth between Centennial Olympic Park and the State House.
So as you're looking at that picture, well, we've now gone to the other picture, but yeah, that picture right there, it's a little tough to decipher. If again, we often talk about Atlanta in the downtown area can look very different because of the development and the change in traffic patterns and all of that. If you take a really close shot like this, and we don't have any control over these cameras, these are traffic cameras, but it's very hard to tell where that is exactly. And I was trying to look at it, trying to figure it out, and essentially, if you think about Andrew Young International Boulevard, it is looking north. You're looking north on that by the park. So I think if you can sort of somehow or other situate your mind to how that looks with the park over there just to the right on the upper part of your screen, you'll have a better sense of where exactly that is. Let's go to Hope Ford right now. She is in the midst of all of this at Centennial Olympic Park Drive and also Marietta Street.
Yeah, so we moved a little further down towards Park Bar. They just announced over the loudspeaker that you have 15 minutes to get out of this area. So now you see all these people that are walking, and we apologize for any profanity there. You see all these people who are now walking back towards that way. But we did see quite a few people who actually heard that over the loudspeaker. It upset them, and they actually walked back towards the police. So while this crowd's moving this way, there were quite a few people who actually went back up towards that police line right there. So we have about 13 minutes now. They just announced over the loudspeaker that that everyone needs to leave this area. So we're going to wait to see what happens in the next. They haven't fired off any more tear gas, and they haven't moved that line up anymore. So we're just waiting to see what's going to happen next at this point. And then you can kind of see there are people kind of hanging around back there as well. Far back, because if they've been out here the last 3 nights, they know that tear gas is about to be popped off. So they're back in that area right now.
All right, Faith, thank you. We can see some tear gas in the background there, which has been used here. There was some pepper spray that had been employed up by the state capitol by the authorities up there, but this has been mostly tear gas at this point.
Yeah, and again, this is just kind of that period as we approach 9 o'clock, as it begins to get darker out there in the streets of downtown Atlanta, where police are efforting getting these folks to head home, to leave this area. And again, as we get closer and closer to 9 o'clock, about 12 minutes out now, we will begin to see more likely of those irritants, that tear gas and such be deployed. We do know that many people are coming out here prepared for that. I saw a man with a gas mask on not too long ago. We know that people are bringing that saline, that milk, other solutions with them in preparation of possibly being tear gassed. And so we do know, and there we go again.
Take a shot.
We see the folks running away, so it does appear that maybe some more of that tear gas has been deployed 12 minutes out from the curfew. I could see in the distance some people appearing to throw things back towards law enforcement. And back there in the distance, you can see them continuing to advance down the street. You can see the law enforcement officers walking down the street. Again, they are trying to get these folks to vacate this area. And this is the tactic that we seem to consistently be seeing from them as it gets later in the evening. They will continue to advance from that original position where we saw them on the far side of Marietta Street. And again, some of these protesters have taken off running, but we do see some that are still up there trying to remain close as possible to law enforcement officers.
We're about 11 minutes away from the curfew, and again, it has been a tale of two cities, during the day, during the night. The question is, what does night bring on this Monday? Does it bring some sense of order, courtesy of law enforcement, or will we see protesters stand and take them on, as we have seen on some nights? Joe Hankey is also at Centennial Olympic Park right now. Joe, tell us what side of the park you are and where you are as far as the street goes.
Well, Jeff, right now we're at the corner of Marietta and Centennial. I know a moment ago Jennifer was saying there was possibly more tear gas thrown. There was no more tear gas thrown, I just want to make that clear. But at that time, the National Guard quickly started advancing up towards the crowd, and they ran back at that time, possibly out of fear of more tear gas, but there was no more tear gas thrown. Just want to make sure that was clear. As we were walking back from the Capitol to the park here, we saw a good amount of the crowd leaving. There was groups of 3, 4, 5 here and there. I could overhear them say that they were tear gas. That was from that last round that Hope Ford was describing a short time ago. So some people heading home for the night. The crowd that you were seeing with Hope, they're staying out here, though.
What am I reading?
You can see this line now, the National Guard. They are moving forward here, pushing that crowd further and further back as curfew gets closer and closer here. But the crowd thinning out, some still staying out here. But so far, no more tear gas since that last round we saw from Hope. Jeff and Jennifer?
All right, Joe, thank you for that clarification. That is a bit different because we saw them just quickly moving out of nowhere. And again, we are about 9 minutes ahead of the curfew, and so these efforts to clear the protesters out of the downtown area have really begun in earnest. Behind them, we could see the vehicles from the Georgia National Guard that were out there as well. And it does seem that their efforts are becoming effective more and more as we continue to see more and more people run away. Joe, what do you think? Or did we lose Joe? Joe, are you still with us?
As far as the crowd, I think as you were describing there, Jennifer. Yep, I'm still here, Jennifer.
Go ahead, Joe.
As you were describing it perfectly there, either more respect or possibly just fear of more tear gas there. But as the National Guard quickly started moving towards the crowd, that crowd just backed up from where we are. We can no longer see them there. We're just seeing the tail ends of the military vehicles there. And then, of course, the National Guard right here off to my left is a parking lot, surface parking lot on the corner of Marietta here. Anyone that's ever headed anything at State Farm Arena or the CNN Center familiar with this parking lot here. There's a few people parked here. There's also people that were up on top of the parking deck there this evening just watching the protesting, not necessarily participating, but watching from there. That crowd also has thinned out with the wind moving. It would sweep some of the tear gas up there at times to the parking deck as well. So here on the corner by CNN, as Pete Smith, our photographer, is whipping the camera around here, you're seeing just the empty street. Just a short time ago, hundreds, if not something around 1,000 people here on this corner with that line of police. It is now thinned out and pushed more towards Centennial Park, but that crowd definitely thinned out. You can see across Marietta and Centennial here, some National Guard. If you swing to the left there, you can see the National Guard there, and there are protesters still that we can see through the National Guard members there, standing there, but it's a very thin crowd, maybe only 2-3 people deep going across the entire street there.
All right, Joe, thank you. We will check in with you momentarily. Hang in there. Good evening, everyone. We are 7 minutes away from 9 o'clock and the curfew in the city of Atlanta. You are looking at live pictures from downtown Atlanta as protesters are once again on the streets of Atlanta demanding justice and systematic change following the death of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police. Thanks for joining us right now on 11 Alive and the ATL. I'm Jeff Hullinger along with Aisha Howard. We will be with you for the next few hours as we continue to check in with our reporters who are flanked all around the city of Atlanta and downtown to give you an overview as you look at the Georgia National Guard. They are together with Atlanta police. Also, we have seen law enforcement from different agencies, including corrections. Clayton County has been there as well. It is a full menu, if you will, of law enforcement facing these protesters tonight. And as we have said repeatedly, it really is a tale of two cities. What we have seen during the daylight hours has been calm, peaceful. It has had police kneeling as well. But once nighttime comes, it has been significantly different. It has been tougher. Oftentimes, it has been meaner. We will see how this plays out tonight in the hours ahead.
And Jeff, that's because the crowd tends to grow as night falls. Earlier today, when our crews got out there around 4 o'clock, it was a very peaceful crowd and they were all in one location. A couple of them did veer off and go to try to block off the downtown connector just before we approached evening rush hour. But once we hit about 6 o'clock, 2 hours later, it seems as though the crowd had nearly doubled, and so did the amount of law enforcement presence out there as well. As we bring you this live coverage now on 11 Alive and the WATL, we are giving you perspective here from the ground, showing you how law enforcement is getting ready to enforce this curfew. Countdown to curfew just under 5 minutes right now. As we've seen in the nights past, once the curfew went into effect, the arrests were very quick and very swift compared to that first Friday night when they took a more docile approach and sort of laid back a little bit and let protesters do their thing. But as we've seen with the increase of the National Guard, with Governor Kemp backing the mayor and giving her that support with even more National Guard members, they are not playing around as soon as 9 o'clock hits.
It is interesting to see how this has evolved over the course of the last 4 days. Think about it. Atlanta police were allowing protesters on the bridge, that area between the parking deck of CNN and CNN's sign. They allowed protesters to gather in mass and even allowed 9 or 10 of those police cruisers to be parked there. And that's when they were damaged. But they have learned very quickly in the last few days, really the engagement with protesters to ensure that everybody is safe, that everybody understands what the rules of the engagement are, whether it's protesters or law enforcement, and certainly it has looked much different from Friday night into Saturday morning. The 9 p.m. curfew now is approaching. We are about 3 minutes away, and once that 9 o'clock curfew is hit, Aisha, we have seen law enforcement certainly on the move. And
it seems like each night, night 3, it is getting earlier and earlier, and they're, starting to get into formation and break up those crowds a little bit closer to 9 o'clock. I think the first night they gave them about an hour and 15 minutes, but night 2, and now we're going into night 3 of the curfew. We're going to see exactly how that plays out here in a little bit. We have multiple crews on the ground giving us different angles from around what's become known as the epicenter near Centennial Olympic Park and on there along Marietta Street as well, as we try to get this view from above here to show you how this is going to progress. And a lot of people have been calling for this exit and this projection and how we get to this to go smoothly. We are waiting to see how that goes tonight. Back on the ground now with Hope Ford, who is right along where those protesters are moving along with those National Guard troops. Hope.
Yeah, so we're out here right now. We're actually walking down Lucky Street right now, and I heard you mention a few minutes ago, Aisha, about how the response has kind of changed overnight. Normally, the last 2 nights by this time, this street is still filled with a lot of protesters, and protesters and police officers are going up against each other at that point in time. Right now, tonight, on night 4, it's really just the Atlanta Police and the Georgia National Guard right now, and the protesters have been moved pretty far back at this point. So there is a lot. The reason we're kind of at this angle where we are right now is there's a lot of law enforcement out here, and we cannot walk past them or get in between them and those protesters. So that's why you're kind of seeing us at the angle that we are right now. We're not walking along with the police, but they're kind of blocking us in on this area, not allowing us between them and the protesters.
Would you give us an idea, again, the protesters, and this is a difficult thing to really judge, but the collective sort of temperature gauge about how it's going tonight, the vibe, can you explain it? Does it feel different from last night, the previous night, or the night before?
This night, again, it does seem that they started earlier. They started a lot earlier, and they went quickly. They did not wait until 9 o'clock. I actually do hear protesters. I hear some chanting a little bit further down. They don't. So a little bit further down, there are protesters down there, but we're not going to get in between them and the police at this point in time. But they've continued to move. They're moving a lot quicker. They're not letting protesters have a chance to, get into that mode where they're throwing things or there's altercations between the police and the protesters. So that's definitely been a big change. And I do just want to say again, I know you're seeing this right now, but I've been out here since 4 o'clock today.
It is 9 o'clock.
Yeah, from 4 until 9 o'clock.
And Hope, it is 9 o'clock straight up right now.
They're moving again.
As we see them moving in a little bit. Hope, the presence of the National Guard especially has been a source of agitation for the protesters throughout the day. With that amount of Georgia National Guard members, how have protesters responded to them tonight?
I can tell you that earlier today, protesters were not happy with the amount of police and National Guard that were out here right now. Georgia National Guard, they were not happy with that. They weren't happy because that protest from 4 until 8:30 was extremely peaceful, and they kept saying, we don't understand, you want peace. We're protesting peacefully, so why do you need this large of a law enforcement response if what you truly want is peace? So you can see right now, again, we're on Lucky Street, excuse me, kind of just ran a little bit, so I'm a little out of breath, but we're on Lucky Street. You do see it is 9 o'clock. There are protesters still out here, and you see this presence. I will say they have not fired any tear gas. They have not shot any rubber bullets. Since what you guys probably saw closer to 8:40, they have not fired anything. They've just simply been walking, and it seems when they move forward, the protesters and the people who are still out here move back. And you can see people still holding signs. I can't breathe. Justice for Breonna Taylor. They still have those signs out here. So they're still trying to
It looks like they're linking arms in an effort
out
not
here.
to be moved now that the curfew
They
is
are.
in effect.
They are. They're trying to be a little bit careful right now. There are cars right here, so they're trying not to get hit by cars right now. So they're moving forward, and these protesters are not moving.
And now this
They are
is
linking
a very
arms.
small crowd right
They're
now.
not moving.
Do we think that they've moved anywhere else, or is this the last of the protesters?
They're moving back. Those protesters, they were linking arms. There are a couple that are still linking arms. We're going to get on the side here. We're just going to, and are they going forward? Yeah, so they're arresting people now. They're moving forward, and they're arresting those people who would not move earlier. They're chasing people down the street. There's a couple of officers. Oop, I'm not going to get in the way of a SWAT. So there's a SWAT officer right next to me that I don't want to get in the way of. So this is what we're seeing right now. We're seeing officers, we're seeing SWAT. They are running towards some of those protesters that wouldn't move. And this is different from what we've seen the last 2 nights. The last 2 nights, they gave them warnings for a couple of hours. And then right around that 10:30, 11 o'clock hour, they weren't giving warnings anymore. They were arresting. This time it seems they're not even giving warnings at 9:01. They're running towards and they're trying to make arrests.
It's 9:03, Hope. So within 3 minutes, the arrest started after curfew.
Okay. And they are throwing, so there are people out on the road that are throwing things at police. This is difficult right now because, as you can see, traffic is still going. So there's protesters around cars, and the police presence is right behind us right now. We're going to kind of move a little bit out of their way so that we don't get in between them, but you see them on the left of us, and on the right. And again, we're just still further down Lucky Street right now. The traffic is still moving, so they're kind of trying to stop, let those lights change. There are still a lot of people. I mean, I can probably see maybe 100 people, and at this point, it may not necessarily all be protesters. It may just be people who are walking around down in this area who didn't even join in on the protest earlier, but it is that curfew now, and they're out walking around. So this is where we at 9:04, I believe. Yes, 9:04. This is where we're at right now.
Hope there looks to be more.
Law enforcement tries to push everyone back.
With each night that passes, there seems to be more efficiency from law enforcement. They seem to be more coordinated and more purposeful on what they are trying to accomplish against those protesters who opt not to leave.
Yeah, I would definitely say I have seen that since being out in out here since Friday to today. I have definitely seen more law enforcement out here. I definitely have seen, and I actually see one of them has a tear gas can in their hand, so I'm going to move a little bit out of the way for that. But we have seen that they're not really giving any more time. Because a lot of the people, at least a lot of the people I talked to today, this is day 4 of protests for them too. They've come out here before. So if these are the same people who continually to come out and protest and support that cause, it might also be the same people who, are out here later in the night, who want to still join in at that 8:30 hour. So we've seen more police, we've seen more National Guard, and we see that they seem to have less patience as it gets towards that 9 o'clock hour because they don't want those people out there on the roads. But again, I do see one of the officers just checked his watch. He does have a can of tear gas in his hand. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here. They're moving forward again, as you can see. And we see him moving forward. We see that can in his hand right there. We're trying to get out of their way. We don't want to get caught in between the middle of them. There are protesters who are still throwing things at police. We do see some of them with guns that are loaded with rubber bullets. I'm hearing a couple of protesters screaming at them, "We're going to stay out here all night." Oh, they want us out of the way? So we're going to move out of their way right now. We're going to run a little bit further down. There's a parking deck over here, so we're going to move out of their way.
A look at Sky Tracker and the downtown area. Centennial Olympic Park Drive. That's what you have been looking at as police, law enforcement, Georgia National Guard have been advancing from Marietta Street at the apex there of where the CNN Center begins at McCormick Schmick, which was looted and hit pretty hard by protesters on Friday night into Saturday morning. But now this is a different story again, as they have been advancing toward the protesters. Joe Hankey standing by live. Joe, tell us exactly where you are in proximity to law enforcement and the protesters.
Well, as you mentioned, Jeff, McCormick and Schmick's being looted the other night. We're just on the corner right off from McCormick and Schmick's here. We got Centennial and Marietta, the intersection to my left. Over my shoulder here, you see this line of Georgia National Guard here. About 2-3 minutes ago, we saw a small group of protesters, what appeared to be protesters. About 10 or 15 of them walked up to this line. 2 National Guard members walked forward. We couldn't make out exactly what they were saying. They just had a normal conversation with them. They motioned for them to go home, to go in the other direction. And that group, they followed the orders and they left. This intersection here for several hours tonight, this is where you saw hundreds of people protesting right in the face at the line of Atlanta police here at the corner of Marietta and Centennial. About 15, 20 minutes before the top of the hour, all of a sudden the police line quickly advanced forward. That's when the crowd cleared out of this intersection, and right behind the police came in this row of Humvees from the Georgia National Guard. They're now blocking off this intersection completely, and as you can see, there are no protesters here. It is only members of the media, police, and the National Guard. But for hours on end, this is where the protest, for the most part, was centered tonight. At times, part of the protest group would split off and go down towards the state capitol. We were there. Tear gas was shot off at the state capitol probably about an hour and a half ago, and then that's when the crowd stayed there for a few minutes, then headed back this way. As Hope Ford reported earlier live, when she was here around 8:40 is when tear gas was shot off here on this corner of Marietta and Centennial. Some of the crowd at that time thinned out. We were walking back from the Capitol. We would see these small groups of 2 or 3 people, 4 people walking, going back home or to their cars. I overheard some of them on the phone with people saying, I was tear gas. You could see it in their eyes, the tears from that gas being thrown out tonight. But much earlier than the previous evenings, this intersection here is clear, very calm. We haven't seen any arrests here, unlike what Hope was describing further up the road near Lucky Street. We'll send it back to you in studio.
All right, thanks so much, Joe. So it appears that the tactic to push them to one particular area has worked tonight. Any resistance or, any people getting angry at the sight of the National Guard, or did everyone seem to comply and go off?
No real resistance, no one getting back in their face, no arrests that we saw here at this intersection. Was everyone necessarily happy with it? No, we did hear people yelling back. We did see, some people hanging around for a few minutes and yelling back at the National Guard and the police, but it never became physical. We didn't see really anything personally. We didn't see anything being thrown at the police officers. They just stood there for a second. Maybe they yelled something, but then they fell back and went in that direction where Hope is. So here at this intersection, unlike other nights, they quickly cleared out. So those tactics that they did put in place tonight versus other nights appear to, at least for the time, have worked.
All right, Joe Hankey on the ground for us tonight. Thank you.
Well, we have seen protesters today, not only in Centennial Olympic Park, as we look at Sky Tracker here, and looking down on the area of Centennial Olympic Park Drive. We saw protesters also at the state capitol. They had assembled there, but not very long. There were reports that they had run into some pepper spray. We saw Department of Corrections officers there with their shields. We also saw the Georgia National Guard that were ringing the state capitol as well. They were dispersed, and we also saw a large crowd around by historic Ebenezer Church off of Auburn Avenue, and a very large group of protesters there were marching their way down Auburn Avenue. We'll continue to see about that group, or if they sort of stayed in that area tonight. So really, Aisha, we have seen an area that has included about 3 groups of protesters, perhaps fewer now as the curfew has hit at 9 o'clock.
And that's been the scene and the story for much of the day, with these groups being really big at times and then branching off into multiple areas. But today it seems like the response from law enforcement was, really on top of getting ahead of the situation. When Joe was on the ground earlier as they were marching to the Capitol, he said they already had about a block already cut off, so you couldn't even get within a block of the state capitol. And I know one thing tonight is, as we go into this and looking over the past few days, what has happened during nightfall, business owners are holding their breath tonight, just, not wanting to get that phone call that any sort of looting has taken place at their establishments. And we can say throughout the day, we can't speak for nightfall fully just yet, but throughout the day, on the ground with Hope Ford, these protests were peaceful. Like you said, Jeff, there were, kneeling together, including law enforcement. A lot of dialogue took place too. You saw law enforcement go up to some of the protesters. Protesters went up to them and had conversations. But it's when you got a little bit closer to the curfew and you saw more of that heavy law enforcement presence that you got more of the agitation coming from them, and probably just not wanting to be told what to do to go home exactly at 9 o'clock.
Well, you mentioned these small business owners that ring the area of downtown Atlanta. There are so many entrepreneurial spirits who have found a way to create their own business, and they get the whammy of dealing with COVID-19, which has shut them down for oh so many weeks, and then you just start to get going again, and you run into some of the difficulties that America certainly is facing, not only here in Atlanta, but 141 other cities across the country also have been experiencing civil unrest. And with that, you can't help but to feel for them. We certainly have had some interviews with some of these individuals in downtown Atlanta. Andy Parati over the weekend had some very moving, touching interviews with a couple that had spent every penny they had to make this business work, and now they didn't know where they were going to turn.
Here we're seeing a very similar scene from Sky Tracker of people dancing in the streets with their signs now that the curfew has been in effect for about 13 minutes. Let's take you back down to Hope Ford right now. Hope.
Yeah, we're right on the side where that dancing is going on. So you can see that right there. It might be a little bit loud, so you may not be able to hear me. But these are still some of the, they're holding signs, so these are some of the protesters that were a little bit up a little bit ago. Now the issue with this here right now is that traffic is still going. And I'm not really sure why that running's taking place. I don't see any officers moving forward, but some of the people that are here, they were a little bit further down a few minutes ago, and they were saying, we're going to stay out here all night. So I guess the question becomes, at what point do the police say they no longer want to kind of play the game of moving further down the line? So we're still on Lucky Street going toward Peachtree right now. And again, as you can see, there's still traffic, so the protesters are kind of weaving in and out between the cars. And the thing is, we're a lot further down from Centennial Olympic Park right now, so everyone we see walking around may not necessarily be protesters at this point. Maybe just some people who are getting off of work, heading home, or who are just walking around. So, but we do see that group there that has signs and who obviously were dancing a little bit earlier ago, who are still kind of playing, who are still kind of in the middle of the road, and they're moving back at this point.
And you know what, I want to set this for viewers who may be watching that are longtime residents here that may not be familiar with downtown, and we hear that quite often. We know that to be the case. Lucky Street runs by the Ferris wheel there and the Waffle House. You see a Starbucks over there. There's a Ted's restaurant to the left, and that's where the Tabernacle is as well, the former Baptist church built around 1909. And it is a wonderful concert venue, and there's parking along there as well. But Lucky Street is always that cut through to find your way to Centennial Olympic Park. And it has been, for the most part, cordoned off with law enforcement over the last couple of nights. But we are seeing, Aisha, we are seeing traffic, certainly through this area. And some of the protesters have been parking in the parking lots in that area very close to Lucky Street and the Waffle House and all of that, where there is quite a bit of parking. So we continue to see cars allowed in that area, which has always been a curious deal. As we see Peachtree Street right now, that's what we're looking at, and you see the MARTA bus and a protester on top of the sign there. But it is a large crowd that law enforcement will, in all probability, be moving very soon.
Yeah, Jeff, and now I'm actually surprised to see that they haven't continued to move in on this crowd as they have done in nights past. So again, we're seeing that exercise of restraint and giving a little bit of leeway with the remaining crowd. Now, the bulk of the crowd does seem to disperse. Now we're seeing the police cars start to move in just no soon as we say that. So we're going to see how this unfolds and if they're going to start making arrests. It looks like they're scattering. If you could just peek through the windows of that MARTA bus.
There's a certain irony seeing a MARTA bus blocking our view of protesters.
Yeah.
For those of you who were here a couple of years ago when the MARTA bus blocked the implosion of the Georgia Dome.
I saw it online, yes. So it seems like they're even going to try to, set up a little perimeter to get them from where they're running to.
And it should be noted that MARTA service has been suspended, so that bus is going nowhere. It is standing or parked in that area. It will not be moving. I see Hope Ford. Hope, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
What are we looking at now? Are we seeing increased police presence now, moving the protesters again?
So the actual the police that you saw marching to move those protesters back, they're actually they stayed kind of where they were, way a little bit farther back on Lucky Street, as these protests, because there was a lot of cars. There's a lot of traffic. Traffic is not stopped in this area, so it appears that they're still back in that area. So as these protesters are up here near this park right here, it looks like they're actually using police in cars to kind of surround the entire perimeter, to encourage that group to break up. And it looks like there's a little bit of chase going on right now.
It's turned into a game of hide and seek here, especially at nighttime.
They did go in several different directions, and so and again, you see a lot of people out here walking. Not everyone out here again is necessarily a protester at this point. Yeah.
And the MARTA bus again blocking the view. All right, there we go. We see it.
A still shot photographer right up on this arrest that's taking place right now with that protester trying to run away. Police officers giving chase and tackling that person to the ground as the crowd scattered and went in all different directions. They had their eyes set on who they would go after. 20 minutes into the 9 o'clock curfew.
Yeah, it's played out that way the last couple of nights, Aisha. I mean, before you get to 9:30, much of these areas have been cleared out by police. Now we're looking at another picture. That's one of the traffic cam that we have at Marietta Street and Centennial Olympic Park Drive. So there you can see the Georgia National Guard assembled along with some Atlanta police as well. But it looks like it's mostly the Georgia National Guard for the most part. But that area has now been cleared of protesters. So with the curfew in effect over the last 19 minutes, downtown is beginning to move along.
All right, our Hope Ford still on the ground there following those police officers who have started to move in. The crowd has scattered, Hope. Are they still gathered in any particular spot, or did the police cars sort of break them up?
Like that crowd's pretty much broken. Yeah, it looks like that's pretty much broken up. I mean, what you're seeing right now is people who, are walking around this area, not necessarily protesters. We did see this person who is being arrested at this point in time, being brought through. And so that huge line of police officers and Georgia National Guard that you saw, they have not moved from that spot back there. So, so we're moving. They're moving. They're using the officers in the vehicles at this point to kind of to assist in chasing down any protesters that still want to stay out past that 9 p.m. curfew.
Usually when that line stays there, a couple of protesters stay face to face with them. Did all the protesters break up from where that line is, Hope?
Yeah, from about 8:40 on, there was no line face to face with police because they were either pushing them back, or they were firing tear gas, or they were starting to run at those protesters. So tonight, unlike a couple of other nights that we've seen, they were not allowing protesters to gather back up in that spot because This is probably the first night that I've seen that it's now 9 o'clock. That once that 9 o'clock hour hit, overwhelming majority of the people who were protesting were gone, and there was just maybe 100 people left, and then that has dwindled over the last probably 20 minutes.
So, Hope, I have some new information here, and Aisha, from Atlanta Police, and this is in the last couple of minutes. In fact, this email I have here is about 60 seconds old. It is from Public Affairs, their information arm of the Atlanta Police Department, from Sergeant John Chafee. Throughout the day, we have been monitoring several large groups of protesters in the city, with the main group being at Centennial, Olympic Park Drive, and Marietta Street. We have encountered several issues during the day, including instances where protesters blocked traffic on several roadways and briefly entered onto the interstate. As of 8 p.m., and that's an hour and 22 minutes ago, we have made 52 arrests. The curfew is now in effect, and officers are working to ensure compliance with the curfew and making arrests wherever they may be needed.
And we see some of those arrests taking place right now. So we are expecting that 52 as of 8 p.m. to slowly start to grow, with the small to medium-sized crowd that refused to disperse at the 9 o'clock curfew. Officers moving in within about 2 minutes of curfew tonight, making sure that they got this crowd out of downtown as soon as they could. So as we just hit about 23 minutes into curfew, we saw a few arrests take place, and even from above, we're not seeing many people remaining on the ground as we take a live look from Sky Tracker right now, Jeff. And so it seems each night is getting cleared out a little bit sooner and sooner, a lot less intense. And I think the community welcomes this sight that we're seeing here. Not as intense as we've seen.
Well, we have seen certain intensity across the United States over the last 24 hours, whether it's in Washington, D.C., or places like Salt Lake City or Denver or Oklahoma City, or certainly Long Beach outside of Los Angeles. It has been a day and night of a lot of protesting. Pick an American city and you certainly can see unrest, and oftentimes it has become very, very tough. Around 6:45 tonight, the president spoke from the White House. He said, essentially, I am your president of law and order, an ally of all peaceful protesters. If governors refuse to quell the violence, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them. He spoke for about 15 or 20 minutes, but that, for the most part, is summation of what he had to say. As far as the state of Georgia, Governor Kemp initially said that there would be 500 troops that would be employed. Then it jumped to 1,500. Now it's at 3,000. The state of emergency has now been extended until the weekend. I asked him on Saturday night if the number would increase. It had been doubled over a series of hours, if indeed the 3,000 could grow into 6,000. And he basically would not either confirm or deny the possibility of that, but instead said that they will wait and see how the week progresses to see how that all of this plays out. Certainly, he was quick to talk about Mayor Bottoms and also Atlanta Police Chief Shields, lauding their ability to deal with this, and said that all three were in group with each other and they were all on the same page.
Let's listen into some of that sound from President Trump earlier today.
Thank you very much. My fellow Americans, my first and highest duty as president is to defend our great country and the American people. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of our nation, and that is exactly what I will do. All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street, or the woman in upstate New York viciously attacked by dangerous thugs. Small business owners have seen their dreams utterly destroyed. New York's finest have been hit in the face with bricks. Brave nurses who have battled the virus are afraid to leave their homes. A police precinct has been overrun. Here in the nation's capital, the Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial have been vandalized. One of our most historic churches was set ablaze. A federal officer in California, an African-American enforcement hero, was shot and killed. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror. The destruction of innocent life and the spilling of innocent blood is an offense to humanity and a crime against God. America needs creation, not destruction. Cooperation, not contempt. Security, not anarchy. Healing, not hatred. Justice, not chaos. This is our mission, and we will succeed. 100%, we will succeed. Our country always wins. That is why I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights.
That was President Trump about 6:45 this evening from the White House, and now you are looking from Sky Tracker right now down on Centennial Olympic Park. And Joe Hankey now joins us. We will drift away from the helicopter shot while they get themselves placed over downtown Atlanta. Joe Hankey, it's all yours. All right, we will check back in with Joe momentarily. Look at some of the armored personnel carriers that we see that have been in place as a show of power, certainly, to those protesters who might have a desire to stay in the downtown area around the park. That's not going to happen. Law enforcement has pretty much cleared that area out since the curfew went into effect about 30 minutes ago.
Not getting much use tonight out of all of the crews. Maybe it was just merely their presence that sent a stronger message. Not seeing a lot of force. Reporters on the ground saying that there was no excess of tear gas being deployed there as we've seen in nights previous. Let's get back to Joe Hankey now with what he's seeing in the area where he is. Where are you right now, Joe?
Well, Aisha, we're still on the corner here of Centennial and Marietta. Very calm scene here, as you can see behind me. Got several Humvees and Georgia National Guard controlling the corner here. Across the intersection, we have Atlanta police officers, but you can see very calm demeanor out here. They're just standing around, keeping an eye on the intersection. For several hours, protesters were out here right in the face of APD. APD were holding a line, stopping those protesters from going further down Centennial towards the Georgia World Congress Center and the Mercedes-Benz. But about 8:45, the police presence, they started walking forward quickly. The protesters at that time, unlike other nights previously, they fell back. At that time, a short time before that, there was tear gas thrown, so maybe there was a little bit of fear as the police came forward that there was more tear gas coming. That might have been one reason they quickly cleared out and ended up where Hope Ford has been, and we've been hearing those arrests being made further up the street near Lucky Street. But this has been the scene for the last half hour here as the curfew has now taken effect for tonight. Very calm scene here At one point, we did see a small group of what appeared to be protesters. It was maybe 10, 15 people. For the most part, they were all wearing all black. They walked up with their hands up. From where we were, we couldn't hear what the conversation was, but Georgia National Guard members, 2 of them, walked forward very slowly towards that group. One of the National Guard members waved for them to go back, go home perhaps, and that group, they stood there for a second, and then they cleared out. That's really all we've seen here in the last half hour as far as protesters go. We've been keeping an eye on it here, but it's been very calm for the most part ever since the curfew went into place. Perhaps that push forward by police, unlike other nights, and the strong presence here of police and the National Guard, a tactic that appears to be working so far tonight. Aisha, Jeff?
A lot of people seemingly still impacted by the images that we saw from Saturday night of the 2 college students that were arrested and tased that resulted in 2 APD officers being fired for use of excessive force. I'm looking on the Instagram account right now for the city of Atlanta. They posted a video of some of the officers from earlier tonight kneeling and talking with some of the protesters. Well, a person under that post went ahead and asked, I have a question about the curfew. I work at a hospital here in Atlanta. I get off at 11 p.m. My question is, I won't be snatched out of my car, tased, and arrested. People referencing that incident. We do want to give you the City of Atlanta's response to that comment there on their Instagram post, where it says people who are traveling to and from work or are engaged in work activities are not subject to arrest. So it's very telling how impactful that incident was, and especially as it relates to the magnitude in which that video spread on social media. A lot of people now concerned, saying, wait a minute, if these 2 people were said to not even be involved in the protest and they were just out riding in their car after 9 p.m., what's going to happen? No one wants that sort of, experience to happen to them. So work activities are acceptable now after the curfew.
Saturday was such a tough night in downtown Atlanta around the park. Not only that incident, which was so unsettling, but also the Atlanta police officer Maximilian Brewer, who has been with the APD for 18 years. He was there off of his motorcycle. He was standing there in the street trying to ensure that everybody was safe. He was struck by an ATV. The driver was a 40-year-old man who had been intoxicated, according to police reports. And he is now recovering in the ICU at Grady Memorial Hospital. But Atlanta police have said that he has a very, very long time and long way to go, a very difficult journey ahead because of broken bones in his legs and severe injuries. And he is not a young man, and that will be a very tough recovery period. We wish the best for him.
And that ATV driver was arrested and charged after also getting some medical treatment. So
yeah, that was the video that I was talking with Ron Jones that you saw.
Yeah.
And you spotted it immediately. It was like it was a flash that came across the screen because he was traveling at such a high rate of speed.
That's how fast the ATV driver was going, and then Ryan Kruger was an eyewitness to it because it flew right by him as he was on the ground reporting for us on Saturday night. And here we are thinking we were in a moment similar to this one where the protesters had moved out. It was very calm.
That false sense of serenity.
Very peaceful, had a false sense of security. And this officer sustained an injury that seemed to be separate from the protest. So that is why we are staying here with you, because things seem to change in an instant as we've witnessed over the past few nights.
Well, we are looking at a very different picture than what we saw Friday at this time. That was the area where we saw so many protesters right there near CNN and also the CNN parking deck, which is to the left. As you're looking at the screen right now, the parking deck would be to the left and CNN to the right, but that's where we saw the Atlanta police cars, squad cars that had been damaged, but they have cleared out. Those areas have been free of protesters today, even a little more than an hour ago when they all had gathered in front of the CNN Center where the McCormick and Schmick meets Centennial Olympic Park. There were hundreds who had been gathered, if maybe even 1,000 people. I'm always bad at all those years in sports that I spent, Aisha, I'm still bad at judging how big crowds are. And that one looked like it was around 1,000 people at that point, but they cleared out as soon as that 9 o'clock curfew hit. They were then pushed, they were shepherded down the road, and they have now exited the downtown area, at least from our vantage point of seeing from SkyTracker and certainly from our pictures as well.
Yeah, this is what we're seeing right now. And again, you see some of the officers, with smiles on their faces and, sort of enjoying a sense of accomplishment. We are just, at 9:36 right now, and it seems like the entire crowd has been cleared out. The last remaining bit of the crowd was where Hope Ford was, and the last time we saw Hope, that crowd was being dispersed via officers in their vehicles who sort of, chased him down and got out to run to make some of those arrests. As of 8 p.m., APD reported 52 arrests. Sure, maybe around 11 o'clock or so, we'll be getting updates as to new arrest totals. And from what we saw, not expecting anything too crazy based on how fast this wrapped up tonight, Jeff.
Yeah, we really have not seen the myriad of arrests that we have seen in previous nights. And look, certainly as we sit here in the television studio in Midtown watching this, just as you are at home, we don't have a great sense of the numbers, the specific numbers, but we do have a sense of the number of people being arrested by just seeing the images of being put into patrol cars or walk to those wagons that then take them down to jail. We've seen a couple. We saw that one football-style hit tonight from afar. And we saw one other individual being placed into an Atlanta patrol car. But other than that, I think we've seen maybe 2 or 3 arrests in the course of the last 40 minutes.
And when you look at the images from around the country, going into day 4, day 5, even day 6 for some cities, the tensions are still very, very high. So today on social media, I saw a lot more of "This is Atlanta. This is the way that protests are done." And so it seems like tonight and throughout the day may have made a lot of people proud in comparison to what we are seeing. DC really turned it up today, especially in DC. I mean, just minutes before the president came on to address the nation. And so for this to be our scene tonight, I think this is what people were saying about getting your point across. There were some really good moments today, and we have been sure to upload those to our social media channels, showing you a lot more of those peaceful moments that we had. We don't just want to show you arrests and fires for the sake of showing you those things. We also want to show you the good things and some of the interesting conversations that have come out of these protests, with people really having meaningful exchanges and getting their messages across to one another and having good, healthy dialogue. And I said earlier, everyone's having their own individual experience in the midst of a shared experience. So if you took the time to go up to an officer, or if an officer came up to you, hopefully that was a very meaningful exchange and a conversation that you will remember for some time to come.
Absolutely. I spent about 45 minutes this afternoon around 4 o'clock on the telephone with Ambassador Andrew Young, and we were just sort of talking about Atlanta and about all of this. And we're talking about Ralph McGill, who was the famous Atlanta Constitution columnist, publisher, about his impact on the civil rights movement and the whole issue of Atlanta and Mr. McGill's role, and how Dr. King cared every day what was written in the Atlanta Constitution, and they sort of used it as a North Star to figure out where to go next. But he spoke of the great organization that they had and the sense of purpose, the sense of what they were going to do from day to day, week to week, month to month, and that ultimately really bore a lot of fruit for them. And Ambassador Young was talking about that whole issue of being organized, staying on message, not letting it turn into something that overshadows what you're trying to accomplish in terms of social justice and in terms of changing the issue of racism in the United States. But it was one of those conversations that I will always treasure having with him, and I'm going to write something about it on my Facebook page tomorrow, Jeff Hollinger 11 Alive, about Ralph McGill, about Andrew Young, and about Dr. King. So look for it.
And from Friday night, we said, well, maybe, that message hasn't made it to the protesters. And so it seems that, the message is starting to get there.
All right, that will end our coverage now on 11 Alive. A reminder that Aisha and Ron will be up at 11 o'clock tonight with a complete compendium of the day and the night's events. We hope you'll be able to join us, but for those of you who would like to continue to keep an eye on all that is going on in downtown Atlanta and points beyond, we're going to head over to WATL right now, and we will continue our coverage with Hope Ford downtown, and Joe Hankey, and Aisha and I will be here. Andy Parati, our fine investigative journalist, is also on the ground in that area. So we will continue to have all the information for you if you so choose at WATL, the Big 36. So we'll see you there in a couple of minutes. Again, don't forget Up Late coming your way on 11 Alive. For Aisha Howard, I'm Jeff Hullinger. Good evening, everyone.
Practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATL.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATL.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
In times of great uncertainty, some things become more clear. The things we take for granted, the people we depend on daily. Here at 11 Alive, we'd like to say thank you. First responders, medical staff, sanitation workers, truck drivers, postal workers, and every brave Georgian doing their part to make a difference. We see you, we hear you, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
In times of great uncertainty, some things become more clear. The things we take for granted, the people we depend on daily. Here at 11 Alive, we'd like to say thank you. First responders, medical staff, sanitation workers, truck drivers, postal workers, and every brave Georgian doing their part to make a difference. We see you, we hear you, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
In times of great uncertainty, some things become more clear. The things we take for granted, the people we depend on daily. Here at 11 Alive, we'd like to say thank you. First responders, medical staff, sanitation workers, truck drivers, postal workers, and every brave Georgian doing their part to make a difference. We see you, we hear you, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
In times of great uncertainty, some things become more clear. The things we take for granted, the people we depend on daily. Here at 11 Alive, we'd like to say thank you. First responders, medical staff, sanitation workers, truck drivers, postal workers, and every brave Georgian doing their part to make a difference. We see you, we hear you, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
I saw, fathers in the crowd. They were crying because they're worried about their children, and some of the officers were also saying, "I'm here with you." So we've seen a lot of different emotions here today. And at that 9 o'clock hour is when we saw police start to move those protesters out, and it's been clear on these streets at least since about 9:30 this evening.
All right, Hope, that is great to hear. We know so many business owners can sleep easy tonight knowing that their facilities should be safe, and knowing that the community is getting their point across in a peaceful fashion. Let's go to Joe Hankey now, who has been out downtown for us as well. Joe, it seems like it's pretty quiet where you are too, and we're not mad about it.
Absolutely, Aisha. Very quiet here. You can see the Georgia National Guard behind me holding that line on the other side of Marietta Street here at the corner of Centennial and Marietta. That scene that Hope was describing of protesters out here for 4 or 5 hours in the street, this is the intersection that they were standing in on that side of Marietta. Was Atlanta police officers holding a line, keeping them away from going further down towards State Farm Arena, the Georgia World Congress, Mercedes-Benz, that stretch of stadiums and centers there. The crowd, though, about 8:45, they were quickly pushed back by police, cleared out of the intersection. There's not been many protesters back at this intersection since that time. We saw a group of maybe 10 or 15 walk up at one point. Georgia National Guard told them to clear out. They left. We've seen a couple others just mill through, saying they're trying to get to their cars. They parked further up the street, and National Guard, letting them get back to their cars so they can get home now that the curfew is in effect. That is the scene here. Very calm, as you described. National Guard, Atlanta Police, Georgia State Patrol, they are all out here. They're staying out here just to watch the intersection, but other than that, not in much action here at this time. Aisha.
All right, Joe, thank you so much. Now, in nights past, we did see protesters moving to different areas, but we've come at you guys from a couple of different angles, and it seems like it's safe to report that they have completely moved out and complied by curfew within an hour, Jeff.
Yeah, and you take a look at those heavy armored personnel carriers that certainly have been a show of force, not only with Atlanta Police, but also with the Georgia National Guard and other agencies throughout Metro Atlanta. And let's look back. This was shortly before the curfew. I'm not sure the exact time. If I see the video, I'll probably be able to decipher what time it occurred. But let's take a look at it. And you can see here some of the running that was going on at that time. And people were dancing as we remembered.
Oh, this is video. The curfew was definitely in effect at this point. That was the last bit of the crowd that was hanging out around downtown, refusing to disperse once curfew did come about, when some of those arrests started to take place shortly, maybe about between 9:15 and 9:30, but was pretty much wrapped up by at least 9:45, and they started moving in at 9:03. Curfew went into effect at 9, and by 9:03 they had started to move their line in. And so what we're looking at here is just those crowds that Hope Ford showed us from the ground that were dancing and playing their music and holding up their signs. But again, No one was throwing anything, no one was yelling at anything, and officers just moved in on the sheer principle that the curfew was in effect. There was no tear gas deployed tonight after the curfew that we witnessed from our vantage point. So curfew effective tonight, night 4.
It was. By the time we got to about 9:20, the protesters had left, and it has been quiet ever since. We are now about 67 minutes into the curfew. We did see Atlanta police running after one individual and making a big-time football tackle here coming up. That is somebody who has played some high school and probably college football at some point in his life.
Yeah, quite a few people took off. So they left the National Guard in place where they were, and you saw that tackle there. That's when officers moved in with their vehicles and hopped out of their cars to run and chase down some of those remaining protesters that refused to leave. And that's when we saw some of the arrests coming. That was the first time we started to really see multiple arrests on camera tonight, right after they decided to move in with the cars to get the people who were still running. They scattered in all different directions, and I guess officers set their eyes on who they were going to get and went after them. And those were some of the moments that we caught on TV tonight. I think we were at, was it 52 arrests, Jeff, as of 8 p.m. Haven't gotten an update from APD in a little while.
Yeah, let me sort of
arrest.
dig up that email, and we can sort of give an alert to that.
Yeah, it's
again.
right here. So it says throughout the day,
Good.
they've been monitoring several large groups. We told you the protesters earlier today, they really divided into 3 groups all throughout the day, with the main group being at Centennial Olympic Park Drive and Marietta Street. They encountered several issues, including instances of protesters blocking traffic in several roadways and briefly getting onto the interstate. That was about 3 o'clock, right before evening rush hour got ready to start. But as of 8 p.m., they did have 52 arrests. Curfew now in effect, and officers are working to make sure that people comply and making arrests where needed. Some of those that we did see here live on air. And it seems like the heavy military presence is still out tonight, although the streets appear to be clear.
And the traffic shot that we have been taking at numerous times tonight. Andy Parati joins us now live from the area down by Centennial Olympic Park. Andy.
Hi, Jeff. We are at the corner of Andrew Young International Boulevard on the other side of the Westin Hotel. Just moments ago, they had a big, huge billboard up for George Floyd. As you can see, no one around us. That's why I'm not wearing the mask, because I am definitely farther away than 6 feet from my photographer. There's a number of National Guardsmen over there. There's a gentleman sleeping on the ground there. And on the other side, there's more National Guardsmen. Some police officers from Atlanta Police Department were here as well, patrolling. No one around us. They said that within, I don't know, about midnight, they'll probably start scaling back some of their resources, just like they did yesterday, just like clockwork. 9 p.m. curfew came. It took about an hour, hour and a half to get everyone to leave, and then this is what happens, which is something that the city wanted, right? They put in the curfew, and they were hoping something like this would happen, where they wouldn't have to have large numbers of people. You know, I was talking to some attorneys that are representing a young couple. They were tased just on this street the other night, Saturday night. Those were the ones that were caught in that viral video getting tased. And they said something to me that I thought was really interesting. I believe Saturday was the first night that they had a 9 p.m. curfew. If you remember, that 9 p.m. curfew came kind of late. It was around, I don't know, 6 or something like that. But when we were in Centennial Park in the midst of that huge crowd, that crowd wasn't told at that time, at least in front of people, to leave until about 10 to 5 minutes before the 9 p.m. curfew. So think about it, a bunch of young folks that maybe don't listen or watch local news. They don't have apps that are alerting them about the curfew happening at 9 o'clock. The first time that they're hearing it is 9-10 minutes from 9 p.m. at Centennial Park over a loudspeaker. And so a lot of people were caught off guard. Some people thought that was really unfair, and that those who were arrested around 9 p.m. Just really didn't deserve it. Obviously, we're on day 4 now, the 3rd day of the curfew. Things are a little different now. The information now is out there. But this is the result of the curfew and a huge military guardsman presence and Atlanta police presence. Guys, back to you.
All right, Andy, thank you. We appreciate it. We'll check in with you in a few minutes. Let's take a break right now on the ATL.
Yep. All right, well, we're clear for now.
No word about our package now.
No, don't worry about the package. Okay. The one.
Can you guys hear me? We're going back. Are we going back to regular format? Because there's nothing going on, so we have nothing to ad-lib about out here.
And welcome back, everyone. I'm Jeff Hullinger along with Aisha Howard. We continue on this Monday night with our coverage of the protesters in downtown Atlanta near Centennial Olympic Park. We are now 1 hour and almost 14 minutes into the curfew, and it has been a night of heavy law enforcement, a very heavy presence with APD, with the Georgia State Patrol, as well as correction officers and the Georgia National Guard, along with some very heavy vehicles pointed toward the protesters. Once 9 o'clock came, they were able to move them down Centennial Olympic Park Drive toward the night air, as it is now a very quiet scene that we are witnessing in downtown Atlanta, a far cry from what we saw last night, the night before, or certainly on Friday night as well. So for those city fathers and mothers who run government here, this is what they wanted. This is what they promised, a zero tolerance from the mayor, from the Atlanta police chief, and from the governor as well. And that quiet certainly has been the result of this heavy law enforcement.
An Atlanta police officer in the hospital tonight, 2 days after he was hit by an ATV during a protest. It happened after curfew went into effect on Saturday night. Things seemed to be calm and all wrapped up, but that's when Officer Maximilian Brewer was hit by an ATV driver. He's now gone through surgery and is now recovering in the ICU. Tracy A. McPeer talked with the medics who helped save him about their mission and what it was like out there that night.
I've never seen so many people out on the street like that and so angry.
Specialist Vivian Nguyen was right near Marietta and Spring Street on Saturday night at around 10:30 when Atlanta Motors officer Maximilian Brewer was hit by an ATV while blocking traffic near protesters.
I mean, there was a lull. The only activity that we took of note was the guy moving up and down Marietta Street on the ATV.
Staff Sergeant Jason Rustin says in the 11 years he's been an active guardsman, he's seen injuries like this on deployments, but he's never had to respond to injuries like this here in the U.S.
The most obvious injuries were the open tib-fib fractures bilaterally, meaning both legs, and he had an open injury to the back of his head.
Rustin says Officer Brewer was in and out of consciousness, and while other ambulances were in the city that night, time was of the essence.
We just happened to be the closest one, so we took the initiative and we're like, hey, we'll take them.
Sergeant Michael Kennedy had been part of a barricade when he got the call.
Tons of people around. It could have very easily injured more than just that one officer.
Officer Brewer underwent surgery at Grady, where he is still recovering.
You never want to see somebody injured that way, especially, a fellow brother in arms. So it was pretty tough to see.
I've heard that he's doing well, and I'm just glad that we made it there so we can save his life.
Each day during this operation, these soldiers leave here from the armory and head down to Centennial Olympic Park. Now they stay there until around 2 in the morning, come back here, go to sleep, ready to do it all over again, as long as they're needed.
All right, another live look right now at downtown Atlanta, and Georgia National Guard's members looking at their cell phones right now as they are standing very near the CNN Center. You know, there have been so many moving parts of concern for protesters and law enforcement, as well as we have seen this interaction that oftentimes has been so tense, sometimes violent, and the close interaction between all certainly has given fear of COVID-19. We are in the midst of a pandemic that had shut down the country for about 10 or 11 weeks. We were just getting back to business when the issue of Mr. Floyd, his murder in Minneapolis, to the knee of the Minneapolis police officer, and it has caused a national anguish and so much civil unrest, looking for change, looking at outrage. And with that comes concern about COVID-19. Here's Caitlin Ross. And we'll try to get...
Dr. Reddy says she was concerned watching the protests. That's exactly the environment that the virus can spread rapidly in, and she thinks anyone who was there should get tested. Dr. Reddy worries there could be a spike in COVID-19 cases in Atlanta after the protests this weekend.
People chanting and shouting, and then add coughing and sneezing because of potentially smoke or tear gas, and I think we had a lot of risk for potential spread for coronavirus.
Police used tear gas at several different times over the weekend, and she says the natural reaction to it could accelerate the spread of the virus.
Your natural reflex is to cough, and coughing, sneezing, and then wiping your eyes, touching your face, that absolutely increases the risk of transmission.
Most of the protesters she saw were wearing masks.
I'm thinking that the protesters weighed the risks and benefits, and their need to be heard outweighed their fear or their concern over coronavirus.
For people who attended the protest, she says wearing a mask and staying socially distant from other people is the best defense.
Wearing a mask is going to be the first thing you need to do. And then, whoever is in your household unit, you can be less than 6 feet from them if your family is coming to the protest.
But if you didn't have a mask or got close to other people in the crowd?
Ideally, people that were in those large groups, it would be ideal if they could get tested for COVID-19.
She says pretty much anyone who is at the protest should consider getting tested for COVID-19. If you can't get tested, you should consider self-quarantining for 14 days. Symptoms usually show up in a few days, but she says you wouldn't want to risk exposing anyone else.
All right, Caitlin Ross reporting for us. Again, we will take a break and we will continue on this Monday night. Stay with us.
Welcome back here. Time now 10:22 on a Monday night. Curfew has been in effect for an hour and 22 minutes. The streets of downtown Atlanta are clear. Still a heavy presence of military vehicles, though, not getting any action, and we are thankful to report that tonight. Let's give you a look back of what's happened over the past 4 days with a perspective piece from our Atticus unit. A look ahead and look back.
I'm very angry, first and foremost, that this has to happen. And for a while, I was very confused on where I should focus that anger because I'm not a violent person. But right now, I'm feeling hopeful. Like, I'm happy to see that so many people came out, and I'm excited to be able to speak to them. Hopefully my voice will reach a lot of people, and I'll be able to provide some people that are confused or angry or feeling hopeless something to look forward to and something to believe in.
We agree with you. For what it's worth, we agree with you. We're outraged. We're hurt by this as well.
It's difficult, you know what it's like. I can't sleep because I don't know if it's going to be my dad, my brother, and my friend. It's difficult. And this police officers are getting away with it. And no one is doing anything about it. The policies are not changing. And they're being sent back out there to protect us.
We're good.
This is not the legacy of civil rights in America. This is chaos, and we're buying into it. This won't change anything. We're no longer talking about the murder of an innocent man. We're talking about how you're burning police cars on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. Go home.
Atlanta has been here for us. This city don't deserve it.
Atlanta is not perfect, but we're a lot better than we ever were, and we're a lot better than cities are. And it is the responsibility of us to make this better right now.
I've seen hurt, I've seen pain, I've seen anger, I've seen misunderstanding, I've seen just some answers. People want answers.
And I saw how they have tore up my city. My heart just really fell.
I'm never going to compare a Black life, or any life for that matter, to a building. We can't just tell people to go home and be quiet and be calm, because then that just covers up the issue that keeps coming back up every time we see Black people brutally murdered on camera in this country.
We hear a taser going off right now. We're not sure who's being tased. Just heard the officer say all you had to do was show your hands. You almost got shot.
I'm very shaken up. I don't even know how to act, what to do. I just can't stop thinking about if cameras weren't there, or if they would have went a little bit further. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened. Like, it's all that keeps crossing my mind.
Whatever you say. Sorry, y'all. Sorry. Hey.
If we say equality, if we say that all men are created equal, then we recognize historically we've always had to fight for that. We always had to validate that.
We rise like a phoenix out of the ashes that Atlanta has always done. Will we use this as a moment to say that we will not do what other cities have done, and in fact, we will get better than we've been?
All right, we are looking at the curfew right now and its effect in downtown Atlanta. You're watching WATL. We'll be right back.
Turn it off. I'll take them out one last time.
In times of great uncertainty, some things become more clear. The things we take for granted, the people we depend on daily. Here at 11 Alive, we'd like to say thank you. First responders, medical staff, sanitation workers, truck drivers, postal workers, and every brave Georgian doing their part to make a difference. We see you, we hear you, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during Primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today. Tonight, we're learning new details about two college students tased by Atlanta police during the weekend protests. As you see this live view tonight, the protests have wrapped up for the evening as curfew is in effect.
Hey, Isha, the incident happened right here on Andrew Young International Boulevard, heading that direction where you see some of the Humvees are. It started with a young man who was driving that way from Morehouse College, and he sees someone on the sidewalk, and he starts recording because it looks like an inappropriate arrest. Well, officers tell him to go away. They follow him. In the end, he's bruised, and his girlfriend is tasered.
Open the door. Can we let the 6-7?
Did you enjoy Lucky Street?
Oh, so one of the things that we want to tell you is that young man who was originally arrested for fleeing police, the charges were dropped. His girlfriend, who was tased, actually, she never even was charged, despite being tased and pulled from her vehicle. Now, the district attorney's office is reviewing the video, and the evidence will determine whether they will file charges. The family of these young couple do plan to file a lawsuit down the road. Guys, back to you.
I just can't stop thinking about if cameras weren't there or if they would have went a little bit further.
20-year-old Tania Pilgrim describes the fear she and her boyfriend Messiah Young had the moment Atlanta police surrounded their car, repeatedly shocking them with tasers.
Okay, stop the car! Stop! Stop! Okay, I'm getting out!
We felt like we were going to die in that car.
Honestly, this has probably been one of the hardest things that I've ever experienced.
It happened just after 9:30 Saturday evening near Centennial Olympic Park. Body camera shows Young trying to record cell phone video of someone screaming and on the ground under arrest. The officer asked the Morehouse College business student from Chicago to drive away and then get out of the car. An officer named Ivory Streeter catches up with him, and another officer starts hitting Young's car with a baton. About that same time, an officer named Mark Gardner fires off his taser, hitting Pilgrim, a Spelman College student from San Antonio. Chris Stewart is one of the attorneys representing the couple.
Children that were treated as if they had just robbed a bank or shot up a church.
Police found no weapon or drugs in the car. Young suffered a fractured arm. Until Saturday, both had no criminal record.
As we watch the video today, it became abundantly clear immediately with the young woman that this force was excessive.
The next day, the mayor and the police chief fired Officer Streeter and Gardner and asked for forgiveness.
And I know that we caused further fear to you in a space that's already so fearful for so many African Americans, and I am genuinely sorry.
That's not enough. Firing right now, charging, that's still not enough. Even charging them, there has to be policing change.
Now, Mr. Young was originally charged with fleeing from police, but they dropped those charges yesterday. Ms. Pilgrim, who was dragged out of the car and tased, she was never charged at all. The district attorney's office is reviewing the video evidence and will determine soon whether they plan to file any criminal charges. There is going to be certainly litigation filed soon. 3 officers also involved in this incident are on desk duty pending an investigation. Guys, back to you.
All right, Andy, thank you so much. Let's get you back on the ground now downtown, where we see most, or if not all, the protests have wrapped up. That's where we find our Hope Ford. Hope, you said this was the longest yet most peaceful protest you've witnessed over the past 4 days.
And I think it was like
Yeah, that's right, Aisha. We're here at the corner of Marietta and Centennial Park, a little bit further back, and this has been the spot where all of the protests have really began and ended over the last 4 days, and this was probably the longest and most peaceful protest that I've witnessed. So you see right now, there's all that's really left is members of the Georgia National Guard. There's lots of members of the Georgia National Guard on the other side, and there's still a police presence out here because they're going to stay out here and continue to enforce that curfew for anybody that might want to walk around. But we haven't seen anybody on these 2 roads or anywhere in this area since about probably 9:20, whenever they finally were able to disperse everybody. But we know we see this and we see the video of those protesters being dispersed, but we do want to say that I was out here from since 4 this afternoon, and from 4 to 8:30 those protesters were out here. They were having passionate debates. They were coming up to the police very respectfully, and they were sometimes things got heated, but it never escalated to any type of violence or anything like that. They were They wanted to get their point across to those police officers. Sometimes officers came over and talked with those protesters. I've seen those protesters and officers kneeling at certain points in time, and that made some of the protesters, they applauded that action when officers would kneel with them. But there's still those protesters who said, no, that's not good enough. You should be the ones kneeling in the first place. We shouldn't be kneeling with you, and having that back and forth there. So a lot of passionate debate that we saw over those 4.5 hours. And one of the things I witnessed today is that when those tempers did start to rise, there were several people in the crowd who would yell out, you know what, we need to walk. And so that large group would migrate to the Capitol, and they would continue to protest there. And then they would come back here to Centennial Olympic Park once they had cooled down, and they would come back over here and continue with that protest. And that happened for a 4.5 hour period today. So the part where we're seeing where the guard and the police officers were dispersing all of those protesters, that was a very small scene compared to the larger scene that we witnessed here today of those protesters wanting to get their message across in a very peaceful way.
All right, Hope, thank you. And we will continue our downtown journey now. From Hope, we go to Joe Hankey, who is in close proximity to Hope.
On the other side here of Centennial and Marietta, you can see the Georgia National Guard behind me, keeping an eye on the intersection here. But for the most part, it appears all the protesters have gone home for the night. So they're just sort of standing down here and watching the intersection now that the curfew is in effect. As Hope said, some of the protesters during the night, they would split off and go towards the Capitol. We marched with them towards the Capitol. We were there tonight as protesters were tear gassed as they approached the Capitol. We were around the corner, so we didn't see what led to that tear gas being thrown into the crowd. But we did see quite a few of those protesters quickly run away from the Capitol. We continued towards the Capitol, and at that point, many of the protesters, they laid down in the street in front of the police there. They started chanting George Floyd's name repeatedly. They were there for about 15 or 20 minutes. Then everyone just got up and marched back towards Centennial Park here. So they were only over at the state capitol earlier tonight at one point for about 20-30 minutes at most. That was the real action there. But at that protest there, they were vocally saying George Floyd's name. You could tell that was their focus tonight as they protest, repeating his name. You weren't seeing the looting and whatnot that we saw on previous nights. But then they came back here about 8:45 is when tear gas once again was thrown here near the park. And then police quickly advanced towards the crowd, and that appears to have cleared everyone out tonight right before the curfew went into effect. So a very calm scene here right now, not much action as the curfew now is in place. We'll send it back to you in studio.
All right, Joe, thank you. And as we go to break, a look at some of what we saw earlier today in downtown Atlanta. This is from Associated Press and the pictures that they have chronicled for us.
Primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut. We can get so caught up in the images of these protests, the scale of the marches, that it can be hard to hear individual voices. Those voices make up this movement. That is why our sister station in Dallas set out to ask the question, why do you protest?
The harvest of unrest in our communities today grows from a seed planted at our nation's founding. It was the early promise of freedom for all, a promise that did not apply if you were black.
Their job is to protect our communities, and they're not doing that. They're literally killing us. How are you going to keep killing unarmed men? How many more people does it take?
We're tired of being victims. We're tired. We're oppressed. We've been oppressed for years. Enough is enough. Now, either you can help us or you can be against us. But we're going to do the same thing.
These men and women taking to the streets are part of a long line of Americans, black, white, and brown, who've protested a long legacy of racial inequality.
We don't get it, shut it down! We don't get it, shut it down! We don't get it, shut it down!
To see that we're not in this fight by ourselves, because it's so often, I know for the last 15 plus years that I've been out here, all of the protests that I've ever gone to, it's always us as African American alone.
My belief in God fuels my action and concern and love for people.
This evening is about justice for the inequality of black people in our system.
These past few nights, nonviolence has been the tool of choice for most people, but as we've seen, certainly not the tool of choice for all.
If you don't come in love, hate is gonna come. That's enough said, man.
The peaceful part isn't as important for me, but the main goal is to be heard, to have justice.
Just like if you stick a wounded dog so many times, eventually he gonna bite, right?
We're tired. It's that simple. We're tired. So until we get justice, we're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna make them work.
The most proudly black city in the world. In the world, man. So, like, let's take some pride in that. Let's focus our energy.
Well, athletes all across the world have been taking part in the protests as well, and the cleanup in response to the death of George Floyd. For a long time, many athletes have been absolutely out front. They have been out front of a lot of protests in America over the years, trying to prove social inequity through the great forums that they have had of athleticism. Several NBA stars led protests in Atlanta. Today, Trae Young led one in Oklahoma. As Maria Martin tells us, athletes are speaking up and the Hawks head coach is leading the charge.
Living in fear, being concerned when you see a police officer as an African-American man, this isn't new. That part is not new at all.
Atlanta Hawks head coach Lloyd Pierce, vulnerable and outspoken, leading the charge with the National Basketball Coaches Association.
It's powerful to see the vulnerability, to see the efforts that we have initially started with regards to proposing some action.
They're developing a new committee on racial injustice and reform to pursue solutions within NBA cities.
If I'm not in this job in a year or two, it shouldn't affect what we're trying to do with regards to the racial injustice.
Coach Pierce, along with coaches across the league, are encouraging players to use their voices about racial injustice.
It's not just going to take just me. It's not just going to take just you. It's all of us coming together and doing this as a collective unit.
We have to encourage them all to feel comfortable and know that they can use their platforms to speak their minds, because they have a huge platform and a lot of people that look up to them, and it's important that they share and express how they feel.
For years, Atlanta's history has been one of peaceful protests. Last week, Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields gave her input about protests and how these conversations have been happening now that we are living this in a present, and what tactics will really lead to progress. Here's Matt Pearl.
Come here. Always standing around for a kumbaya. Ain't nobody coming to protect us.
This video from a protest in Charlotte has been shared tens of thousands of times through Atlanta and beyond.
He's 16! And they gonna kill him next week. He's 16! What we gonna do? You tell me.
Generations at a loss amidst a cycle they believe they can't stop.
What you see right now is gonna happen 10 years from now.
What I'm seeing are people that are hurting, people that are in pain, and they're processing their grief in very different ways.
There is a tension around what progress will look like and what it will take.
Even when we peacefully protest, we're taken to jail.
State Senator Nikema Williams says she wants people to turn their energy to the upcoming primary, but she won't criticize those who took out their anger on property.
I'm never going to compare a Black life, or any life for that matter, to a building.
The real work happens when the cameras are gone.
ACLU of Georgia Political Director Chris Bruce has worked on the ground in Brunswick since the death of Ahmaud Arbery. Saturday, he offered pro bono legal services to anyone arrested peacefully protesting. But of those doing otherwise?
I'm not going to criticize anyone for the type of things that they're doing and the way that they decide on protesting.
Remember why we here.
That tension has existed all weekend.
Remember why we here.
On Saturday, Jaylen Brown of the Boston Celtics led a protest in Atlanta that he chose to be peaceful. But he also tweeted, "Do not confuse the response of the oppressed with the violence of the oppressor." During the fires Friday night, Killer Mike said this:
"It is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy."
1 minute later.
So that's why children are burning to the ground. They don't know what else to do.
In terms of destroying property, that's not the narrative.
Teos Wynn of the Millennial Civil Rights Campaign did condemn the looting and burning, but for him and many others, what matters most is what comes next.
We can't just repeat actions that we've seen in the past. Given everything that's taken place, now what?
Ballot boxes, grassroots efforts, solutions that are visible, but for so many,
You're gonna be right here too.
so distant.
So what I need you to do right now at 16 is come up with a better way. Because how we doing it, it ain't working.
And on this Monday night in downtown Atlanta, that is a live picture. That is how it looks. The Georgia National Guard in full force downtown to enforce the curfew that came at 9 o'clock tonight, almost 2 hours ago. We'll take a break.
To help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
In times of great uncertainty, some things become more clear. The things we take for granted, the people we depend on daily. Here at 11 Alive, we'd like to say thank you. First responders, medical staff, sanitation workers, truck drivers, postal workers, and every brave Georgian doing their part to make a difference. We see you, we hear you, and we appreciate all that you do.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people, or are you doing this to make money, or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during Primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. On 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid
Taking a look at a very calm night in downtown Atlanta. This is a welcome sight for so many in our community after more than 4 hours of peaceful protests throughout downtown Atlanta. That is where we find our Hope Ford. Hope, you've been out there every night for us, maybe all but one night, if even you got the one night away. Please tell us, what is your perspective about how today went and how you're feeling right now as we approach 11 o'clock?
Well, everything out here, is relatively calm, and we have the officers and the Georgia National Guard behind me right now. They're still staying out here to make sure that no one else, kind of comes out here. But throughout the day, we did see 4.5 hours of peaceful protest, probably the longest and most peaceful protest that we've seen at Centennial Olympic Park for the last 4 days. And also just the police presence has also been different. It's been a larger police presence probably in the 4 days that we've seen. And right now, instead of them running around and arresting people, which is what we did see for the last couple of nights, we saw them running around, up until 11, 12, and 1 o'clock, still making arrests. This area over here, they've just been sitting there, just keeping an eye out for everything. So overall, from the protest all the way up to the time at 9 o'clock when it was time to disperse everyone to right now, this has been the calmest of the 4 days when it's come to that protest.
All right, Hope Ford has been on the ground for us doing an outstanding job. Thank you so much, Hope. We are glad you can get to go home at a regular time tonight and get some rest. We thank you for all your efforts there on the ground.
Boy, she has been terrific, huh? Man, she has done 4 days of work for us and nights that have just been extraordinary, along with our other reporters. You can go down the road with Ryan Kruger and certainly Joe Hankey, Andy Parati. Been terrific. Faith Abube down there as well.
Rebecca Lindstrom of the investigators. Team. I love how the investigators have pivoted to help us in this time. It has been phenomenal to see them giving such great perspective to what's happening in our community.
Absolutely. That's it for us for now. See you on 11 Alive in about 3 minutes.
Team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during Primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear. on 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Today at noon on 11 Alive.
We are seeing that lack of smell or altered taste can be a symptom.
We answer your coronavirus-related medical questions. Because 11 Alive is where Atlanta speaks.
Televised newscasts not enough for you? Get even more at 11 Alive's YouTube channel, where you'll find uncut interviews, extended body cam footage, live streams of Atlanta's biggest trials, and more. Subscribe to 11 Alive today.
Let's start with a viral message going around. Quote, vast majority of people who died had ibuprofen Advil in their system. This message is fake.
We just bought 20 dust masks for $97.
Are you doing this to help people or are you doing this to make money or both?
Both. Take this email sent to the Verify team. Is it safe to have your house cleaned by outside workers? The best practice is to limit guests to emergencies only.
We know things are changing every day, but we're here with you. Continuous COVID-19 coverage during primetime. We're committed to giving you facts, not fear, on 11 Alive News Primetime, weeknights from 8 to 11 on WATF.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched